Okay, good morning, everyone. If you could just take your seats so we can get started. So welcome to the 2023 Peter Mac Women in Science Symposium. Thank you to everybody who has joined us here in person in Parkville, but also to everyone who's joined us online. And we apologise for the last minute change in Teams versus Zoom, but tech issues, they do happen. So we will start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, paying our respects to all elders past and present and acknowledging any elders who are with us today. So before we run through the plan for today, some introductions. I'm Dr. Laurie Smith and I'm joined here by Dr. Laura Forrest. And together we co-chair the Research Gender Equity and largely from the funding and from the prestige of these accolades. So for me, the Leo Award really came at a critical point in my career as it gave me the opportunity to present my research at leading international conferences and institutions and receive specialist training with international collaborators. And this all dramatically advanced my research. And this type of international exposure is essential for progression along the career pipeline. And in 2022, this all culminated in being awarded a Victorian Cancer Agency mid-career fellowship. And so this was a real game changer for me. This was made possible by the recognition and opportunities provided by the Leo Award. So I'm really so grateful. I'll pass on to Laura.
Thank you so much, Laurie. So when I was awarded the Leo Medal in 2019, it provided me with both recognition and acknowledgement from the executive and senior research leaders here at Peter Mac that my research and my contribution to our community was valued. I used the award to visit collaborators in the US and attend a conference in Salt Lake City in Utah to present my research.
It was just my audio was completely off.
Can we just make sure that we're muted, please?
So these opportunities to present my research to an international audience prepares you well for moments like this when the AV guy interrupts you. You're welcome. And it all contributed to my research track record, and I too have subsequently been awarded a Victorian Cancer Agency mid-career fellowship. And that all occurred in 2020. And more recently, I've been invited to lead an implementation evaluation of a precision oncology trial funded by Melbourne Genomics Health Alliance. And so I think it's really clear to see that when women are awarded and given recognition and acknowledgement, you can go from strength to strength in your research career. Now, we have a lot to get through today. We have a really exciting lineup of speakers. But we're also looking forward to hearing from you all soon. So thank you very much for coming. We'll also be taking questions for each speaker through the Menti platform, both for the people here, but also for those of you who have joined us online. To submit a question, you need to visit Menti and enter the code 5644875 or scan the QR code that's on the screen. For those at home, I think. And
I think maybe there's an issue.
There's maybe a little issue with our slides. I'll just keep talking. Great. We're going to start by hearing from Peter Mac's Chief Executive, Professor Shelley Dolan, and our Board Chair, Professor Maxine Morand. We will then be joined by Ms. Kat Theophanous, MP, Victorian Parliamentary Secretary for Women's Health. Before breaking for morning tea, we're going to hear from our keynote speaker, Associate Professor Misty Jenkins from the Walter and Eliza Hall, who's a lab head there. After morning tea, we're going to hear from our two Leo medalists and then our Peter Mac biomedical animator, Dr. Maya Divyak. Thank you, Maya, sorry. And our second keynote speaker, Peter Mac lab head, Associate Professor Cara Britt. But now it's our absolute pleasure to welcome Peter Mac's Chief Executive, Professor Shelley Dolan. Thanks, Shelley.
Good morning, everybody. And it's just so fantastic to see this room nearly full. It's after so many years of being starved of company in this room, a room, that is devoted to having people in it and, sharing what is best about healthcare, research, education. It is just so lovely to have you all here. So a very, very warm welcome from me, and it is just an also to those of you online, thank you very much for joining us virtually. So can I add my thanks, first of all, to our board chair, Professor Maxine Morand, who, as you all know, is extremely well known in this field and led from Parliament really right from the front to ensure that women had access to much more in their daily lives, but also Maxine has really led in the field of science and research and is a board member on AMRI, and also leads the Jedi front at AMRI. I can't help but think of Maxine with a lightsaber leading that. But, you know, those of you that know her, that is quite an apt picture. So, but can I also add my thanks to Ms. Kat Theophanous, MP, for joining us today. Kat has a massively busy timetable, so we're going to keep ourselves to time because she has to leave us and go and lead her own International Women's Day event. So thank you for making the time for us this morning. And can I also welcome any other board directors are here, my executive team colleagues, the Research Gender Equity Committee, all of our gender equity committees, the Women in Science Parkville Precinct on WISP, and absolutely all of you that are here virtually or in the room. It's a huge pleasure to be celebrating and demonstrating the excellence of women in science and research at Peter Mac. Now, I was counting up this morning with my daughter as we were getting her ready for school, and this is my 6th International Women's Day event over the last 2 weeks. I was very lucky on Wednesday to be at Government House with the most amazing group of women. I sat next to the Chief Executive of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. On the other side of me was the Australian Ballet, just incredible women. And I kind of had to check about a few times about why I was there, but it was just wonderful to see these leading women in science, schools, industry, law, the arts. It was just perfect. So it really has it's really come into its own, hasn't it? But as we will talk later, there is still more to do. So the Lear Medal, which is, as we will say later, is only possible through our foundation. So the Lear Medal helps to raise the profile of women researchers in the critical early to mid stages of their career, where they face many barriers and often lack support. The Australian Government STEM Equity Monitor shows that the proportion of women in STEM qualified occupations has grown. It's grown from 13%, 1-3, in 2020 to 15% in 2021. And the number of women enrolling in university STEM courses has increased by 24% between 2015 and 2020. So it's great that it's going the right way, but it's slow. And it's too slow. You know, I've got 2 young teenage girls at home. I need to get it accelerated for them and all of the other young women around us. And women still make up only 27% of the workforce across all STEM industries in Australia. And on average, they still earn 18% less than men across all STEM industries. So we know there is a very long way to go. And if you look at the data, and we like data here at Peter Mac, don't we? We can't help ourselves. We like to get our hands on those numbers or indeed on qualitative data to inform us going forward. And if you look at the data, children are asked to choose at year 5 in Australia, whether they really are going to concentrate on maths and science or the arts. And I've probably said this in every event I've been to, but I think that's a really false division. You know, if you look at the burgeoning of times in the Renaissance, all the Renaissance leaders did the arts and science. In fact, there was no division. It's a very modern division. And I would argue that you need the arts in science, and you need both. And to say that a girl is not able to do science or maths at the grade 5, that surely can't be right. We all mature at different times, don't we? And I think we will also see a bit later today that actually culture and art is integral and critical to really good science. And I'm really glad that we are going to see that live up here today. So we have, as you can imagine, a long way to go. But the Lear Medal is there to put right up front that we value the contributions of women researchers of all kinds. Achieving gender equity is integral to our mission of being an employer of choice. And we want to have the very best researchers, and we want to demonstrate leadership in the global and research communities. And there are many times we do. We are very, very lucky to have international visitors here many times. And Maxine and I were very lucky to host people from Europe and from Israel not very long ago. And one of the leaders from those countries was astonished that our board chair was a woman and that the chief executive was a woman. And I just have to sometimes say this, just really for fun. If you look in this precinct, we have 4 female board chairs, we have 4 female chief execs. So, you know, that is a bit of fun, but it just shows that this precinct is leading, but we still have a way to go. We here at Peter Mac are continuing to advance our 4-year gender equality strategy that seeks to model gender equity as a workplace of choice for both women and men. And the 3 principles that underpin this strategy are those that we can apply to equity issues everywhere. Elevating the voices of women, particularly women researchers, gives us an opportunity to learn from their findings and their life experiences. It is essential, as we think about our strategy, to design diverse workplaces that are welcoming and accessible for all. And I was really pleased to see one of our new inclusivity and diversity leads over there. Maddie should be very embarrassed that I'm doing that. Because, of course, today we are focusing on gender. But actually at Peter Mac, we want to be really loud and proud about all inclusivity, including every race and ethnicity, thinking about disability, not just visual disability, but cognitive disability. We want Peter Mac to be a place where everybody feels safe and equal. And I am really proud that Peter Mac has so many engaged, passionate advocates who are advancing gender equity across all work areas. I know that everybody is focused on this and working really hard on it. And our board wouldn't let us get away with not doing this. Our board is particularly challenging on this area, and they are absolutely right to be. My job is really, most importantly, to set the culture and to set the tone of this organisation. And I can't do that if I don't have a board that challenges me, but also supports me if we don't get it right or if we don't move quick enough to make sure that we feel safe to do so. So I just want to say a couple of words about men. So, because actually there are some really important men in this room, and I'm going to talk about that a bit later, but I just want to say it now. So, and this is going to kind of be a bit somber for a minute, and then we'll come back up. So Australia, like many places in the world, is still not a safe place for women. If you look at the statistics, it has got worse. So 1 woman every week, every 7 days in Australia is murdered by her husband or loved male. And that's got worse. Recently, it was 1 in 10. A year ago, it was 1 in 10. So we have to do something about that. And there are ways of tackling it through structures and committees. But also we have to help our young men to have the right role models and the right experiences in life where they support women and they support inclusivity and equality. And we have amazing examples of men in this organisation who do that every day. I have an amazing example at home who, without Luke, my husband, I would not have been able to adopt 2 beautiful children and to have the career I've had. And without my beautiful nephews, my sister and her husband would not be where they are. So I'm indebted, and unfortunately they can't be here today, but I hope they will come one day soon to Peter Mac, to an organisation called Man Cave, who is dedicated throughout Australia to giving those young boys who have not had the best start in life and who do not have culturally safe role models that start. And so I hope that we can work with Man Cave to show young men and boys as they grow up that we all need to be inclusive in society. So, and I'll keep saying this because we are a family at Peter Mac, and it is all of that family that I am so grateful to. So last year, the NHMRC launched its gender equity strategy to achieve a more gender inclusive and diverse medical research workforce. And the Women in Science Parkville Precinct, or WISP, continues to bring together the Parkville Medical Precinct around a shared vision of improving workplaces and diversity in leadership. And I can see a future in which we really do achieve true gender equity in medical research, but we must stay committed to it. I got a letter from Anne Kelso yesterday, who is the leader of the NHMRC, asking all of us to support women who are actually having a very difficult time with e-safety at the minute, since the NHMRC have changed their view. And so because the NHMRC have said that they will look at 50% and 50% applications, women are getting a very hard time on the email. And the e-safety commissioner across Australia is really worried about this. So can I please ask all of you to take Anne Kelso, I'm going to publish the letter to everybody, but we need to take a stand on this, and I mean as each individual. We need to be really out there supporting any individual researcher who feels alone and be very supportive and sponsor them. So this event couldn't be, you can tell I'm quite passionate about this, can't you? And I know that all you are. And I'm just so grateful for the work of Laurie and Laura in getting this all together, for our communications team for making it happen, for our foundation for actually giving the real dollars to the Lear Medal Awards. And that is, and I want to thank all of you. But before I'm 2 minutes ahead of time. I'm very pleased with that. Before I delay any more, can I ask you to give a very, very warm welcome to our board chair, the Honourable Professor Maxine Morand.
Thank you, Shelley, and I think the force is also strong with you. And everybody in this room, the force is very strong. So good morning, everybody, and this is my favourite thing I get to do as board chair of Peter Mac. It's in its seventh, I think this is the 7th year, is that right, Laurie? Yeah. So this is the 7th year I've attended this event, and it's such a positive event where we all get to celebrate. And I think you made a really good point, Laura, in it's important to celebrate and recognise women because they did not deserve it, and then it supports them in their career. It's so important. I'm going to refer to my notes here because otherwise I forget things that I want to say. So, Shelley, I just wrote a note then when you were speaking about women taking up STEM. It's not the problem really in medical research, though, as we know, because more than 50% of women, there's more than 50% of women at the entry level of medical research. It's at the drop-off as they progress through their careers, and there's the low number of women who reach level E. So at Peter Mac and most other research institutes, it's around 25%. So it's 60% at Peter Mac, I think, are female, around that in medical research, but at the top it's 25%. So that's what we've got to focus on. I wanted to also acknowledge the people that work so hard in this space, really passionate advocates, people like Laurie and Laura. Also a shout out to Shireen Loy and Sarah Russell and so many other people who work so hard in this space. And you've got a great, champion with the lightsaber as well in Shelley Dolan, chairing the Gender Equality Committee. And there is genuine commitment to making a change in this space. And I know that they've made sure that recruitment policies, for example, build in considerations of diversity at every stage. So we all know we love a stat. So I've got a couple of stats as well. So and you all know better than I do what a competitive environment it is to secure funding. And I want to share some data with you from Peter Mac. So in 2022, Peter Mac submitted 363 lead applications across 129 different schemes. The success rate was 40% compared to 30% in 2021. They are extraordinary outcomes. We should be incredibly proud of that. In 2021, the female success rate was 27% compared to male success rate 31%. Last year, female success rate was 44% compared to 36% male success rate. And it annoys me when people say, isn't that amazing? It's not amazing. It's because we've got fantastic women putting in submissions and they're getting rewarded. I am not surprised. And as Shelley said, the NHMRC have announced that equal number of grants will be awarded between men and women in the leadership category of investigator grants. And we know there are relatively few women applying at that level, and I'm sure this will result in more senior women being supported to make applications in that senior level. I had some things to say about WISP, but I think you've covered that really well, Shelley. Their framework that's been developed and funded actually by the Victorian Government, WISP and AMRI, is about to launch their framework for managing sexual harassment in the medical research sector. So I'm looking forward to that launch. And the final thing I'll say about funding is many of you will have seen that the Snow Foundation, who have so far put out, I think it's about $100 million in grants for medical research, they've announced that they will not fund organisations that don't meet gender balance benchmarks in leadership, recruitment, promotion and awards that are provided in the Institute. So there's a lot going on and it's really fantastic to see. So I'll finish there because now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Kat Theophanous, who is the member for Northcote. She's the Parliamentary Secretary for Women's Health, and she was just saying how pleased she was to get that portfolio when she was appointed a Parliamentary Secretary. And I do want to thank you for coming today because there's so many things you would have been invited to. So we really appreciate that you've come today to join our Women in Science Symposium. So please give a warm welcome to Kat Theophanous.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm loving the Star Wars references, I've got to say. As a mum to a 5-year-old girl who absolutely adores Star Wars and insisted on having her 5th birthday party themed as a Star Wars themed birthday party, this is perfect. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and any First Nations people here today, especially First Nations women. And I also want to acknowledge Professor Shelley Dolan and Professor Maxine Morand. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's really a pleasure. And it's also an honour to be here representing our Minister for Women, another fierce woman in government, the Honourable Mary-Ann Thomas, who I've just been so pleased to be appointed her PALSEC and to be seeing up close and personal her in action because she's absolutely phenomenal and will push her portfolios to the limit. And we're here at the impressive Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, this wonderful world-renowned institution that has contributed so much to our understanding and treatment of cancer. The Victorian Government is, of course, very proud to have committed more than $54 million to Peter Mac's cancer research through the Victorian Cancer Agency, supporting high-profile performing cancer research fellows. And I'm very happy to report that almost 70% of those fellowships awarded to Peter Mac by the Victorian Government have gone to women. So we're happy about that. And I'd also like to acknowledge while I'm here last year's winners of the Lear Medal, Dr. Michelle Yong and Dr. Junyun Lai, who are excelling in their respective research areas. Congratulations to both of those outstanding women. Well, it's certainly been a very big week as we've celebrated and lent our collective voices to International Women's Day 2023. And each year it gets bigger and it gets louder. And I think that that's a good thing because it allows us to pause and reflect on the crucial contribution that women make to every aspect of our society, but also to drive forward our work to achieve gender equality for women and girls. This year, the UN theme for IWD is Cracking the Code, Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality, and it's a very fitting theme for this celebration of women in science, an opportunity to highlight just how critical innovation in healthcare and medical research is to gender equality. Victoria is an international leader in health and medical research, and women have played an integral part of creating that legacy. Just within this room, we have an abundance of Victorian women shaping the future of cancer research. And across my own community in the inner north, and just to pick up the thread of what you've been saying about girls in school and pathways, I'm happy to share that I've had many conversations with young students, young women students in the high schools across Northcote who have a real deep passion for pursuing science. And it's so wonderful to have these conversations with them about their careers. And our public high schools in Northcote and Thornbury are now being built with new STEM centres to give these students the pathways that they deserve, because the pipeline is critical and role models are critical to the pipeline. And we have several here with us today. I'm sure you're all very much looking forward to hearing from our speakers, Associate Professor Misty Jenkins and Associate Professor Cara Britt, on their impactful work, as well as Dr. Maja Divjak's 3D biomedical animations, which I hear are not only exceptional conceptual tools for medical research, but works of art in their own right, which is pretty phenomenal. You're all paving the way for young women in science, so thank you. Because the truth is that despite the progress we have made, there is so much more work to do across gender equality in science, medical research, and healthcare more broadly. The male body and male experience is still overwhelmingly cast as the default in everything from discovery research to clinical trials to drug development to treatment in emergency. This exclusion has serious consequences for women's health, borne out starkly in so many statistics that I'm sure many of you have read, and also anecdotally in the thousands of women now lending their voices to the push for medical equality. A recent study out of ANU found that women are up to 75% more likely to experience adverse reactions to prescription drugs than men. And when it comes to chronic pain, we know 70% of the people it impacts are women, and yet 80% of pain studies are conducted on men or male mice. Chronic pelvic pain and endometriosis continue to be underrepresented in scientific literature, even though 1 in 3 women will suffer a reproductive or gynecological health issue in their lifetime. And though women are more susceptible to autoimmune diseases and challenging conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, which my mother has, and multiple sclerosis, women's pain and symptoms are more likely to be diagnosed as psychosymptomatic or a mental illness. These disparities in treatment and health outcomes are only compounded for women who face intersectional barriers as well. The good news is that the ground is shifting, and at a national and state level, there is now significant reform on the horizon to address the knowledge gap and achieve better outcomes for women and girls. The Victorian Government has committed to supporting medical research in women's health with the development of a dedicated Women's Health Research Institute. This will be a purpose-built centre modelled after the highly successful Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre, which will bring together education and research and treatment. It will play a big role in developing cutting-edge treatment and pain management for diseases that specifically, disproportionately, and differently impact women. We're also committed to opening 20 dedicated women's health clinics and expanding our existing sexual and reproductive health network to 20 sites across Victoria. We'll double the number of laparoscopies for improved diagnosis and treatment of endometriosis, and we'll establish an inquiry into women's pain management. That, I think, will be a crucial opportunity for women across Victoria to share their lived experience and help us improve patient care. So this is an exciting time for women's health and women in health. Slowly but surely and together, we'll turn the tide on gender inequality for women in science, in medical research and healthcare. And I want to thank the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre for hosting this event and for your ongoing commitment to supporting women in science and gender equality more broadly. It's phenomenal to see an organisation that puts it really at its heart. So thank you. And I want to acknowledge the remarkable contributions of women in science and in health, both past and present. Your determination and hard work have helped to create better health outcomes for all of us. Thank you for having me and for this beautiful event.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Ms. Theophanis. We really appreciate the fact you've made the time to come here and celebrate women in science with us. We are very fortunate in Victoria to have a state government that is so committed to supporting and increasing representation of all kinds. And now I'd actually like to invite Ms. Theophanis to come back up again, together with Professor Morand, Professor Dolan, and the Head of Philanthropy at the Peter Mac Foundation, Sarah Hornby, to announce and present the winners of the 2023 Lear Medals.
Thank you very much, Laura and Laurie, of course. And again, thank you to Kat, Maxine and Sarah Hornby for joining us. Now, I'm hoping this is going to work. So I'm hoping somebody will let me know if it isn't going to. Before we present this year's Lear Medal, let's hear from some of our previous Lear medalists. Ta-chung! This is when we need the lightsaber, isn't it? Does anyone know if we've got it working, Anastasia?
Sorry, everybody. Technical difficulties this morning.
Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. We may have to present an avant-garde play or something, which we'll kind of make up as we do it.
All right, maybe we'll play that after the break.
Okay, no problem, Anastasia. So, I would like to just reflect on the privilege of presenting the Lear Medal, which recognises two of our most outstanding female researchers. Now, last year, Maxine, in that way that she constantly mentors me, and I do mean that in the best way. It is great to have a boss that always takes you that further. She kind of whispered to me, hasn't it been 40,000 for a few years? And of course it had been. So this year, I'm delighted that through the foundation support, we have put each Lear Medal up to $50,000. And hopefully that makes a big difference to everybody. And a very big thank you to all of you from the Peter MacCallum Cancer Foundation, because without your incredible work and the generosity of donors across Victoria to make this award possible. This kind of commitment to advancing the careers of talented and dedicated female researchers is essential to supporting equity and creating new opportunities. Our first winner is Dr. Katie Fennell. And I have there... Now, I am very lucky because I get to sit in a room while people come in, very nervously come in and present to us. So let me tell you a bit about Katie Fennell. Dr. Fennell is a postdoctoral researcher in the Eckersley-Maslin lab at Peter Mac with a demonstrated track record of both high quality research and leadership. She is interested in developing creative approaches to investigating mechanisms underpinning cellular plasticity in cancer. Now, I know you all know what that is. I did have to look it up and think about it a bit. In her career to date, she has developed a cutting-edge tool, Splinter, that enables the identification of rare cancer cells that drive non-genetic evolution. This resulted in 2 co-first author publications, not just in any old magazine, in Nature and Nature Communications. It's incredible. She was finalist in the 2022 Premier's Prize for Health and Medical Research, has received a Snowdome Foundation Fellowship and a Peter Mac Foundation grant to drive new research. Dr. Fennell has also been a member of Peter Mac's Gender Equity Committee and Women in Science Parkville Precinct Committee. Many, many congratulations. Now, Katie, would you like to say a few words?
Okay, I've also brought some notes in case I forget who I need to thank. Okay, firstly, I just want to say it's a huge honour and to be honest, a bit of a shock to be one of the Lear medalists this year. And I want to sincerely thank Shelley and Ricky and the rest of the exec for championing this award, the selection committee for their time considering my application, and the whole Gender Equity and Diversity Committee for all the hard work that you do in this space. This award is going to be a massive support for me on my pathway to independence, and I hope that in the future I can achieve half of what the other amazing Lear medalists have achieved. It can be extremely difficult to be a female in research for many, many reasons, of which I don't need to explain to this audience at all. But I think one huge thing that we often experience is that we don't often apply for awards or fellowships because we don't feel like we're ready or that we're actually good enough. And I was actually going to wait until next year to apply for the Lear Medal, as I thought I didn't quite meet the criteria. However, with some support and encouragement from my supervisor, Mel, I decided to apply. And so I really hope that this signifies to other junior females out there that you should absolutely believe in yourself and just apply for everything because you never know what could happen. I would also like to acknowledge here the privilege that I have experienced in my research career, and there are many other unique challenges that are experienced by women of colour, those that are from the LGBTQ community and other diverse backgrounds that I do not face. So here to my thank yous. So of course I wouldn't be receiving this award today without the incredible support of so many people over the years. I want to first thank Mark Dawson and Charlotte Nike, who were both my PhD supervisors, and I think that they would both agree the scientifically unconfident person who started with them back in 2016 is a completely different person to who I am today. And I certainly would not be here winning this award without their incredible mentorship. I would also like to thank all my amazing colleagues throughout my scientific journey so far, but I would really like to particularly highlight Dane Vasiliadis. Dane and I worked together side by side on our paper for about 5 years, and he's been such a huge support to me, and this was some of the best years of my career so far. I would also like to highlight all of the incredible female role models that we have at Peter Mac. But I would particularly like to thank Mel, my postdoc supervisor, for all the advice and encouragement over the past year. I think Mel is an incredible mentor, and I think she is redefining what a traditional leader looks like. And this is really important for women and diverse people in these roles in the future. I would also like to thank my amazing friends for their support over the past 10 years. My accent doesn't suggest so, but I actually grew up in the UK. And I moved here to pursue my career in research. This can be really hard to do without your family close by, but I'm lucky to have some of the most amazing friends who are my family away from home. And I, of course, would like to thank my wonderful parents for their unwavering support throughout my whole life, even when their only child decided to move across the other side of the world. It's really special that they could actually be here today, as they missed so much of my PhD milestones due to the pandemic. Thank you both for everything. And finally, I want to thank my incredible partner and best mate, Jessie, for always being my #1 supporter. We have been through so much together, including 9 months of strict COVID lockdown, endless discussions about careers in science, lots of weekends and late nights spent at the lab, but also so much laughter and fun. I am so glad we get to do this whole science journey together, and I can't wait to see where our careers take us. And thank you everyone for coming today to support women in science. Thank
you. Really made me cry. Wow. I have to confess, I felt a little emotional there. I'm so glad you can all be with us. You are so welcome here at Peter Mac. As you can tell, I am from England as well. So I'm so glad you are here with us. Our second award winner cannot be here today, but I do want to just say a little about her. Dr. Annette Lim is a medical oncologist. I should explain that about 2 years ago, or maybe, yes, do take a seat. About 2 years ago, I think it was, we realized that it was incredibly difficult, maybe just for me actually, but very difficult to judge how to kind of judge between laboratory researchers and the most amazing fundamental science, splinters and things, and clinical research, and kind of and the difference was too great for us to be able to compare easily. And I remember there was a wonderful speech pathologist who may be here. I think I saw her come in at some point, and it was just totally impossible. So what we did was think, well, do you know what? Let's have 2 Lear medals. One for, if you like, applied science or clinical science, and one for laboratory science. And Dr. Annette Lim falls into the clinical and applied. She is a medical oncologist and PhD clinician scientist. She has dedicated her career to improving head and neck cancer outcomes, and is committed to excellent clinical practice in collaboration with clinical and translational research. She has published 13 first and 5 senior author clinical and translational papers. She has been principal investigator on multiple phase 1 to 3 clinical trials, 2 of which, and again, you know, it's not just an ordinary magazine here, which have resulted in New England Journal of Medicine publications. So for those of you not in these worlds, Nature and the New England Journal are pretty up there across the world. And this has led to practice change and also PBS approval of immunotherapy for advanced non-melanoma skin cancer patients. And you only have to sit with Annette or any of her team and look at the photographs. In fact, it's quite difficult to look at the photographs of particularly men, actually, because it happens more in men with these terrible cancers, and then see them after immunotherapy. And it's just absolutely incredible. And in my lifetime as a cancer nurse and an intensive care nurse, I remember seeing these patients, and there was very little hope apart from really, really quite radical, really quite difficult surgery. And of course, that didn't cure. It just took away some of the disease for that moment. So it is absolutely wonderful in our life, well, in my lifetime, to have seen these amazing advances for a really horrible cancer around the head and neck. In her career, Dr. Lim has attracted over $1.5 million in grant and fellowship funding, including a Peter Mac Cancer Foundation Discovery Fellowship. Currently, she is leading an international project as a member of the Head and Neck Cancer International Group Protocols and Guidelines Committee. She supervises 3 PhD students and will soon commence as co-chair of a Peter Mac PhD Student Advisory Committee. Sorry, I'm losing my papers here. She is also on the organising committee for the Australia New Zealand Head and Neck Cancer Society annual meeting for 2024. Very sadly, she can't be with us here today, but it's actually for a very good reason. So as many of you will know, we have had trouble getting people on holiday recently, partly because of the pandemic, partly because of the immense clinical workload that everybody has suffered throughout the world, really, but also in Victoria, also in Australia, because of people's delayed care during the pandemic. So I'm absolutely delighted personally that she is on holiday, and it did take me a bit of chatting to convince her that that was good and that was the right thing to be. So she is taking a well-earned break with her family. She did prepare a pre-recorded acceptance video. I'm not sure that we can show it now. We might be able to. Hang on. I could do some poetry. I could try and explain a splinter. I would fail in that very quickly. I'd have to get somebody up here to help me. Oh. There, here she is. Hooray. Thank you.
The Parliamentary Secretary for Women's Health, Cathy Chair of Board of Directors, Maxine Moran-Dayham, Professor Shelley Dolan, Chief Executive, Peter Mac Board, Peter Mac Executive, Peter Mac staff, students, consumers and volunteers, our precinct partners and booster leaders, Peter Mac Research Board, the Equity and Diversity Committee, family, friends and colleagues. Thank you for the privilege of receiving the Lillian Medal. I'm sorry to not be able to attend the prestigious occasion, but I am very happy to be on holidays, as I hope that each one of you know and practice the importance of self-care, especially in the rigorous fields of cancer research and healthcare. This award represents a recognition of the cumulative work of not just my achievements, but the hard work of many other people who support me in my role, other clinicians, nursing staff, trial staff, allied health staff, scientists, cleaners, admin teams. Too many people to name, but who individually contribute so much to me and my patients, and who all are crucial parts of this organism, not institution, of cancer care that we all form part of, that aims to make the cancer journey easier for every person who walks through our doors at Peter Mac. This award also recognises the sacrifices that we all have had to make to help the world be a better place for cancer patients, sacrifices that cost and impact our families, our loved ones, our children and ourselves. I'm proud to be part of an institution that is working towards reducing the disparities that face us due to our gender. Only just the other day I was in conversation with two other male surgical colleagues where the surgeon was called Mr. out of respect for his role, and I was called by my first name. And despite the president of the surgical college now being female, it goes to show that the cultural change and cultural blindness takes time to evolve. And despite even the kindest of hearts, we sometimes don't realise our own contributions to fostering inequity. But these situations create opportunity for open conversation about where we have been and where we need to get together. I prefer being called Annette and not doctor, as the title refers to my profession and not who I am, nor my value as a person. There are many other disparities that still require championing. I've lost count of the times that I and others have been judged due to appearance, and even with the nicest of intents have been thanked for coming to Australia to be a doctor, when in fact, I was born here and know no other country is home. I think about our patients who require an interpreter whose appointments are booked for the same duration as other appointments, despite the fact that consultations take double the amount of time. Do we care for every culture equally? And what are our inherent and systemic unconscious blindnesses to the cultural disparities? Even medals like this have necessary KPIs to superficially assess one person against another, presuming a history of equal opportunities between candidates. But can I challenge that although the medal recognises achievements in the context of gender disparity, the complexities of assessing the other disparities faced by others, like being a refugee or being from a poor socioeconomic background, having different literacy backgrounds and so forth, are more difficult to visualise or quantify. And judges value according to achievements and not the inherent value that is in all of us, which is that we are human and are fundamentally unique and precious. I recently lost a friend to depression, the ultimate disease that reminds us that beyond a title or achievements, the way we as people generate meaning in life is complex. We need to have conversations about values, not achievements, about what makes us who we are, and to create safe spaces to have open conversations about the prejudices, disparities, and unconscious bias that continue to divide us and promote inequity, so that we can begin to make the world an even playing ground for all. And I'm thankful that this Lear Medal and Peter Mac promotes these type of open, bold and respectful conversations so we can make meaningful steps forward together for equity to truly flourish. And finally, I am grateful for the generous financial support provided through the Lear Medal to champion research to improve outcomes for patients with cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas, one of the most common skin cancers worldwide with the highest incidence in Australia. And cancer is so common, it gets neglected. I know with the support of Peter Mac and the team of researchers that I'm privileged to work with, that breakthroughs are possible and we can make the world a better place for one another. Thank you.
Wasn't that fantastic? And we started out today talking about inclusivity, and I really do want us, as we go forward from today, we have had this wonderful 2 weeks really of celebrating International Women's Day, but I do want us to focus equally on all the other disparities that Annette so carefully outlined there, and we must focus really clearly on all of those. And whilst I talk about those, I want to come back to something I talked about earlier. I want to award a new award. Is that right? I want to present a new award today. I talked earlier about the significant importance of male champions and male role models in our lives and in our professional workplaces. And this platform, if you like, gives me the freedom sometimes to do something that's very dear to me. And so I want to start today awarding our male champions of gender equity. And I'm really glad that he's in the audience, because, and actually he's quite noticeable in the audience, because the first time we award this, it is going to go to Professor Rob Ramsey. Now, Rob is known for some interesting shirts and T-shirts, and I was delighted that I spotted him out of the corner of my eye coming in today, and actually couldn't really miss him, as you will see. So, Rob, please come up and join me. Now, I'm going to give you a chance to say something, but listen, I don't want the other men here to feel left out. I think I saw Mark Dawson somewhere over there, yes, who has been an international leader in this space. Actually, I can see Dominic, who is one of my own executive colleagues and friends. And I can't tell you how much Dominic has done day by day to support women in the workplace. So there are many of you here. Indeed, we just heard, didn't we, about how important family and partners are. So, but I especially want to thank Rob, because he has formally and informally helped so many women in science at Peter Mac. And we will have this award, but we will always think of Rob in his beautiful flowery shirts, that amazing T-shirt, and the impact he has had on this group, but also for many years, actually, may I say decades, at Peter Mac. So, Rob, can I let you say a couple of words?
Yeah. I can promise you I've not prepared anything. This is a complete surprise and absolutely overwhelmed. It's fantastic. Minister, Parliamentary Secretary Kat, you are connected in a way to me because my wife, Marie Overall, Dr. Marie Overall, worked with Kat in Fiona Christensen's office, the Minister for Women at the time. Unfortunately, she's passed away. I am really quite taken back. I prefer to have a PowerPoint, a few slides. So this is an important area to me. I have a fantastic young daughter who's done exceptionally well, and she actually works in this building now. She didn't want to do science. She thought that it was boring. She thought that what we talked around the dinner table wasn't worth listening to, until one day she wanted to know about microscopy, and Marie and I bombarded her with information about the different kinds, and somehow or another she's involved in running clinical trials, which is a bit of a journey, because now we walk on the beach and we talk about clinical trial design. So really cool. So this organisation does care about women. We're doing a good job, but we can do a lot better. And I hope that other men in this community will see this as a community that values what we do, and that men are important in this journey as well. The way we bring up our sons, the way we look after the people we mentor in our labs and in the clinic are going to make a big difference. So I actually am quite nervous. I'm really quite surprised by all this, but I am so pleased, and I hope that this is something that other men will experience in the future. So thank you very, very much.
I'm amazed that we managed to keep that secret. It's quite hard, isn't it, to keep things secret? So, but I am very relieved that Rob was here. Now, I've now lost, I think now I go to, yes, I do. Now, I know that some people need to leave now, so I'm just going to give people the opportunity to take their leave. And this is only because there's so much going on. Whoops.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I thought we'd play the video now.
Yes, let's play the video now. And then if anybody needs to take a break or leave now, thank you again. It's so lovely to have you with us. Thank you. Let's see if we can get the video on.
There are unique challenges faced by females, and it's important that our emerging leaders are supported and encouraged to take the next step.
It's really important for everybody to know that Peter Mac support and champion their researchers who identify as women to help them progress their careers.
Often women don't feel that, they're very unassuming about their work, and I think it's crucial to show that they are indeed deserving of recognition of their excellence.
I think it was really about the acknowledgement and recognition of all my research and what I had achieved over the years, and having all of that recognised and acknowledged in a forum of such amazing and successful female researchers. To be kind of put in that category was really very special.
It really highlighted and put me in the spotlight in terms of my research work. It was really great acknowledgement from Peter Mac, not only for myself, but really uplifting for my research team as well, a lot of whom are women.
The Lear Medal was a really significant career and personal milestone for me. It felt like a really great recognition of the work I put in over the previous years, and really set me on a forward trajectory.
I felt really valued by the Peter Mac research community, particularly also because the selection of from such a high caliber group of women.
It was really huge for me at the time. I think it was just a real validation of my work in a way as a scientist, and how well I was doing at that time. I think the main thing was that it really gave me increased visibility and raised my profile. I'm a bit of a kind of sit-in-my-office introvert, so I think being forced to be exposed in that way was beneficial, letting more people know who I was and what I was doing.
Obviously, there's the practical aspect of the money, so that was really huge and really significant for me at that moment in time. It's gone on to a number of achievements, both within Peter Mac, but also nationally and internationally.
We often do our work in silos. It's a nice way of highlighting it, and then different people have approached me with questions about my research, and I think it's expanding that research and knowledge outside of my small area.
And it was the cornerstone, really. It led to successful fellowships from Peter Mac and then the VCA and NHMRC. Without the Lear Medal, I don't think I'd be where I was today.
Also, intangibly, it just gave me a lot more confidence to keep doing what I was doing, to know that I was on the right track, and just to keep persisting, to keep at it.
You may not think that you're the right candidate, but there's unique leadership styles and different career trajectories that are equally important and valuable to Peter Mac. So I just encourage people to apply.
I can't thank them enough for, in a way, paving the way, being a role model to me when I was applying, and I hope I'm a role model to others over the future years. I would say put your hand up.
It really means that you'll make a name for yourself. You can showcase your research, network, join lots of collaborative opportunities, and progress your research in other ways that you would never have thought you could.
Thanks so much to the comms team for putting together that video. I think that was really inspiring to hear from all of the past recipients, and congrats to Dr. Fennell and to Dr. Lim for receiving the award this year. Really great. Can't wait to see what you guys are going to do with that award. So we're now very excited to introduce Associate Professor Misty Jenkins, who's going to deliver the first of this morning's 2 keynote presentations. So Associate Professor Jenkins is a leading scientist at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute for Medical Research, where she runs a lab. And many of you will know her as a past Peter Mac alumni as well. It's really exciting to have Misty back at Peter Mac today to be with us. So her work specialises in finding new therapies to treat brain cancer. So Associate Professor Jenkins is currently a board director at Monash Health and has made multiple contributions to Indigenous Australians as co-chair of the Indigenous Health Research Fund for the MRFF, and established and chairs the National Centre of Indigenous Genomics. Misty has also been a passionate advocate for women in science in multiple avenues, and I actually was one of the founding members of Women in Science Parkville Precinct alongside Misty, which was really great. And so Misty has also won many prestigious awards, too many for me to mention, but I did want to highlight that she was the Tall Poppy recipient in 2015, was one of the top 100 women of influence in 2016, and was inducted into the Honour Roll of Women in Victoria in 2020. Thanks so much, Misty. We're really looking forward to hearing from you today.
Just hit the arrow. Is it? Thank you so much. I am a Peter Mac alum, and so it's absolutely my delight to be here today. So Wominjeka, I just want to acknowledge that we do meet on the beautiful and unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and you know, for those of us who really still do have a very strong connection to this place. And I think that the acknowledgement sometimes can feel a little bit tokenistic. You know, we're used to now hearing it a lot, but I think, you know, this year particularly more than any other year, you know, it's going to be really important to hear our First Nations voices as we hurtle towards a national referendum to bring the Uluru Statement from the heart to life. And so it's certainly very important to me. I don't know if you can see any slides, but will their slides come up? It's not really that necessary, but sorry, thank you.
Would our remote stop working?
Oh, no, that's good. That's fine. But look, my journey, I'm not really here to talk to you about my science today. I think, you know, today it really is an opportunity to shine a spotlight, just like we do for NAIDOC Week. Let's talk about Indigenous issues. This is International Women's Day. Well, it was on Wednesday, the week, you know what I mean. And so that's really going to be the focus of my talk today. So but briefly, you know, my journey began at the local government school on the outskirts of Ballarat in Wadawurrung country. My mob's from Gunditjmara. But, you know, as a teenager, I got a lot of tonsillitis and throat infections. And I used to wonder what's going on inside those lumpy lymph nodes in my neck. And it's really still a question that drives me today. What's going on in there? How are they talking to each other? And so my STEM pathway was really ignited during my my school days, and I spent 11 years at Melbourne Uni, you know, bachelor, and then sort of did a PhD with Peter and Steve, and these were really the best years of my life, and they were an explosion of learning and possibility. And then I did my first postdoc in Oxford and Cambridge with the incredible Gillian Griffiths, again, director of the Institute, really strong woman, and then came back with just the wonderful Joe Trapani, director. And so he was just exceptional and very supportive. And so my academic career has been very linear. Which I know is sort of very traditional, and that's, you know, not everyone takes a traditional pathway. But I have certainly also made some very strategic and intentional decisions along the way in my career, and they're really the thoughts that I want to share with you today, as well as some thoughts on International Women's Day and what it means to me. But before we do that, as we gather here today to celebrate International Women's Day, let us take a moment to celebrate those who have walked before us and the women who will walk in our steps. And today I'm going to use the word woman and female, but I really want to express these terms as an inclusive definition of women, including transgender, gender diverse and non-binary individuals. And don't get me started on intersectionality, where individuals face an even greater challenge, but I just don't have the time for that today. But as you can see, that's why I'm wearing my dress, Emma Stenhouse, an amazing artist, and and I'm wearing this today because it really does highlight the connections, for the connections of my connection to Peter Mac, where you hide my country and where I'm from. So it was very intentional. But for decades, women have fought and struggled and shattered glass ceilings, and they really do leave behind a legacy of progress and empowerment. Yet as we reflect on how far we've come, and we have come a long way, but we must acknowledge that there is still much work to be done. True equity and inclusion remain elusive goals, and it is up to us to continue the fight. So let's use this day as a positive call to action, a reminder to all of us at all levels that we are part of a large movement towards a more just and equitable world. Gender equity is a topic very close to my heart, as has been mentioned. When I was here working at Peter Mac back in 2014, was a founding member of WISP, with some of you that are also here in the room, and I see Alicia Oshlak, you were part of that group as well, which was a willing collective formed to address gender inequity among Australia's largest medical research institutes in Parkville. And I'm sure most of you in this room are all too familiar with the gender gap in science, and so I'm not here to labour the point today, but you all know that women are really still underrepresented in STEM fields. And I think if you were to look at this scissor graph, if you look at this scissor graph 30 or 40 years ago, where we did have a pipeline issue, I think as Maxine Moran pointed out beautifully in her address this morning, is that we don't have a pipeline issue in the biological sciences anymore. We still do absolutely in maths and chem and engineering, but in the biological sciences and med we don't. But it's above level C, it's absolutely scissors out. And so, so you can see that we have made progress in the last 5 years, but it's so slow. And I think, there are more, whilst there are more women currently at level A, at this postdoc level, we have really serious issues in leadership. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, and that's really what I think this day is really here to shine a light on. One of the many reasons is that, starting a lab and getting to that level also happens to coincide with the tough period in our lives of starting a lab and starting a family. It's a challenging time that requires a significant investment of time and energy, and often coincides with this critical point in a scientist's career where we're expected to produce our best work. But unfortunately, the traditional measures of success don't always take this into account. As scientists, we're judged, of course. We all have a H index above our head. We're judged by our track record of publications, citations, how many students you've published, how many grants, how many grant dollars you've brought in. And so as a result, women who take time off to start a family or struggle are often overlooked and undervalued. What we don't measure are the skills required to build and maintain successful collaborations. We don't measure the quality of mentorship and sponsorship of other women. We don't measure the challenging of starting a lab and balancing work and personal responsibilities, whatever they are, whether it's caregiving or what have you. So to truly support women in STEM, we need to further adopt a broader and more inclusive definition of success, and one that values collaboration, mentorship and diversity of experience. And I'm sure that this room is absolutely full of stories of sitting around the table. Sometimes I've been around a table and I have been the only woman. Sometimes talked over, cutting off when you speak, asked to pick up the coffee, or worse, having contributed an idea only to have it heap-eated by the bloke at the end of the table who is subsequently credited with the idea. And I can see heads nodding, so I think you sort of know what I'm talking about. It's never intentional. I don't think this is ever intentional. I think this is very unconscious, but it's oh so prevalent. And recent, and I mean very recent, very explicit and lurid comments made to me at a conference I attended just last year reinforced to me that despite this progress, despite working in organisations that support gender and support differences and are inclusive, and we have action plans, but despite all of that, but still, this is still happening. Shockingly and unfortunately, the inherent sexism is still very much alive and well, and dinosaurs still roam the earth. And in addition to sexism, our human brains also make other mental shortcuts. We have evolved to be evolutionary creatures to make unconscious biases of other people. This actually helps us kind of make quick decisions and stay safe and navigate through the world. And so there's extensive literature about this, and also the funny one is the consequences of baby names, right? So if you want your son to be more likely to run an AXS listed company, call him David. There are more Davids running AXS 200 companies than there are women CEOs. 4 women, 11 Davids. I looked this up. We love stats. We love a good stat. My name is Misty. What comes to mind? Well, it's a jazz standard written in 1954, a character in the first Pokemon series, but mostly it's a name associated with strippers, porn stars, children from low socioeconomic parents, and is the most popular name for cats. Fact. But does that alter a reviewer's thinking about a scientific proposal written by a Misty? Maybe. Our human brain has been conditioned to use past experiences and surroundings to help us make mental shortcuts in navigating decisions. But sometimes our human brains can get it wrong. And so, assumptions like girls being taught from a young age that they're more suited to caring and doing household chores. Oh, she looks so pretty. Boys being encouraged to be adventurous and take risks. How this impacts how we view ourselves, this impacts how we view our abilities and how others view us. Women are still often overlooked and underestimated in professional settings, and ideas and contributions can be dismissed or undervalued. You'll all be familiar, I hope, with the now famous experiment from the music industry where orchestras historically were very male dominated. And back in the 1970s and 80s, orchestras started conducting blind auditions behind the screen, which actually led to hiring being based then solely on musical ability and led to gender equity in orchestras. It was a really important experiment. And similarly, women are, just as likely as men to be involved in car accidents. However, the use of male crash test dummies severely impacts the severity of injuries to women. And also research has shown that the driverless cars are more likely to hit darker skinned people, highlighting the importance of addressing racial and gender bias in technology. And speaking of technology, the theme of International Women's Day this year is, of course, cracking the code. AI and chatbots like ChatGPT, aren't we all talking about that? How we implement and whether institutions should be creating policies around how academia uses things like ChatGPT. Gets its information, of course, from the internet. And of course, the internet is a place where women and minorities are not fully represented and can therefore further perpetuate gender and other forms of inequity and also limit our understanding of the experiences and needs of underrepresented groups. This is a poem written by the then 22-year-old Camille Rainville and was performed, some of you may have seen this viral video by Cynthia Nixon from Sex and the City. It went viral a few years ago. It's a very powerful video actually and created that unpacks the term of what it means to be a lady, and just replace lady with woman or whatever you want, but paired with strong images of pop culture. And I think it really, it came out at a time when we were really redefining of what it means to be female, and particularly for our trans women. But the main message here is clear, is that women are criticised no matter what they do. And the poem was released as Harvey Weinstein's guilty verdict came through, and I think was a timely reminder that the female experience is filled with judgments all the time on our appearance, our weight, our body issues, and what happens to our bodies when they're used by other people. I've personally heard people say that women are just not as smart as men. I've been in the room where I've heard that with my own ears. A very famous male Nobel laureate in the UK very publicly stated women shouldn't be in labs as they are distractingly sexy to the male bosses. I don't know if you remember that whole movement, hashtag distractingly sexy, and then we all started taking photos of ourselves in like PPE and things and posting them. It was just like we just kind of owned that hashtag, I think, after that point. We've all attended conferences where less than 20% of the invited speakers are women, the same women who were then pulled onto the laps of or asked out by the male conference goers. We've all bore the brunt of the invisible labour of the gender tax in our strive for equity on committees and the penalties placed on women in our workplaces. I've been told that if I want to be taken seriously as a scientist, I should stop wearing such bright red lipstick and looking so girly. Often being a feminine woman who leads with vulnerability and openness and leads in a way that's true to my authentic self does or has resulted in me being undermined, not accepted and delegitimised. Like somehow the wearing of skirts and cosmetics is a correlate of my IQ or my commitment to my science. So when I am being my authentic self, I've had senior scientists remind me, toe the line, wear the pants, take off the makeup. That's too much change. That's not how things are done here. We've been doing it like this for decades. It's important to recognise and challenge these assumptions, which for me just means I chose a brighter shade. And of course, unfortunately, I could go on, and I'm sure many of you in this, you could write books on your stories. So let's get to some myth busting. One of the other reasons for this slow progress is the persistent belief that there's something wrong with women that needs fixing. We see this, and I've seen this when I've sat on panels before, in the countless diversity and inclusion initiatives that focus on training women to act more like men or to fit into a male-dominated culture. But as Catherine Fox argues in this book, Stop Fixing Women, the problem is, of course, not with women themselves. The problem is that we're working in a system built by men for men and is still favouring men today. And it's been amazing to see the changes, I think, that Anne Kelso's managed to get over the line with the NHMRC, and so it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out, and really appreciated your points as well, Shelley, about the sort of anti-female campaigns that's led to, and so it's important we're all aware of that. And I think, you know, it comes back to this myth, the myth of meritocracy, right? Like, we like to think that in science that the best and brightest will rise to the top, regardless of your gender and your background, because, you know, if you're smart enough and persistent enough, it's science. So, you know, you're going to get there. But the reality, that is not the reality. The reality is that the system is still biased. And, you know, there's a lot of literature around this. You know, studies have shown when women have identical qualifications and experience to men, they're still less likely to be hired or promoted. Another problem, of course, is the idea that women need to be more assertive. We need to be more confident. You know, if you want to succeed, women just lack confidence. I'm sure we've all heard that, right? Women just don't put themselves forward for enough. But as Fox points out in this book, this assumes that the reason women are not succeeding is because they lack something, rather than acknowledging that the system is stacked against them in the first place. There's a lot of reasons why women maybe aren't applying, and it has nothing to do with their confidence. The system. I hope you're following me. Seeing some nodding heads. Okay. So what do we do to address these issues? Well, for starters, we need to stop trying to fix women. We need to fix the system. We need to question our assumptions and our biases that are so ingrained that we're sometimes not even aware, even from the well-intending, well-meaning people. And we need to keep striving for an inclusive and equitable environment for everyone. I've faced many challenges as a woman in science, and juggling the demands of an active career and my personal life. I've encountered instances of gender bias, discrimination, and even sexual assault. And this is despite also being fortunate enough to work in incredible environments like Peter Mac, like the WEHI, that prioritise diversity and inclusion. We all know the challenges here because you all live them every day, but knowing what the barriers are isn't enough. The system and our leaders and our colleagues and our brothers and our sisters do need to keep advocating for change. And I know that this is exhausting. This is exhausting, and it's taking far longer than it should. I want to point out, this is a photo of Alice Stewart, and Alice was a British physician and an epidemiologist, and she discovered the link between X-raying pregnant women and birth defects in their children. She published this fact. She published many papers about it. The whole world knew, but it still took another 25 years for practice to change and to stop X-raying pregnant women. So we have to keep disagreeing, we have to keep sharing our stories, and we have to keep challenging the status quo. I love men, our fathers, husbands, brothers, mates, colleagues, who all play such a critical role in promoting gender equity and inclusion in science. The best thing I actually did for my career was marrying my beautiful husband, Dave, who I couldn't do what I do in work and outside of work without him. He's just extraordinary. Men are powerful allies, not just witnesses or bystanders, true allies. Actively calling out sexism when they see it, advocating for diverse representation in leadership positions, actively supporting career development and advancement of their female colleagues. And I'm so proud to know you, and congratulations on that award. It's very well deserved. Real equality means recognising the value of our personal lives as much as our work, and understanding how they support and nurture each other. Of course, we won't achieve true equity in our workplaces until we get it in our homes. When men share housework and childcare, everyone benefits. A male postdoc in my lab took 6 months parental leave to care for his child. This should be the norm, and in fact it is in other countries. But sometimes this change can also be simple. It can be as simple as recognising that a female PhD student has her hand up to ask a question after the seminar, but the chair still passes the microphone to the senior men. We all need to notice these little things, only because by being aware of them can we change the culture. And only yesterday, as I was thinking about writing this speech, and I was looking at conferences that I wanted to go to later this year, and there was a neuro-oncology conference, and I noticed that the scientific steering committee was comprised of 9 men, not a single woman. Doesn't make me want to go. Does not make me want to go to that conference. But by working together and creating a more inclusive culture, we can build a strong, vibrant scientific community. We have an opportunity to address these biases, address the stereotypes, and strip them down. So what are the solutions? What can our organisations do to improve equity and inclusion? And I'm glad that I've got both the CEO and the chair of the board here for this list.
Okay, I'm getting
Conduct a gender pay gap analysis, and you already pointed this out yourself. And I have a statistic for this too. The PIs, principal investigators in medical research, earn 20.5% less than their male counterparts. So even when women have made, even though in that scissor graph, when women have made it to leadership, they're still getting paid less than their male colleagues. And I, know that traditionally a lot of very, very senior members of organisations get top-ups and all sorts of things, and there's no transparency around this stuff. So create a gender-inclusive workplace culture, encouraging diversity and inclusivity. Having days like this are fantastic, but also focusing on recruitment, promotions, bias training, critically important, right through to the simple stuff like lactation rooms that's not in the toilet next to the animal house. Speaking from personal experience. Other flexible working arrangements, of course, family-friendly working hours. We're getting better at this, I think, since we've had since the global pandemic, for good parental leave structures for all staff and students, regardless of gender. If dad wants to be the primary carer, there's no reason why dad shouldn't get the same parental leave from our organisations as the women. Providing training and development for all genders and fostering quality mentorship and true sponsorship programs, and nominating your incredible women for awards and exposure. And I think we heard that beautifully said by the previous Lear medalists today, where they talked about how winning awards actually meant that then it put them on the map. It gave them exposure and enhanced collaborations. People knew who they were. And of course, awards attract awards, and they go on to propel. And so you've got incredible female leaders here at Peter Mac, and so it's wonderful to see them honoured. In addition to changing structures, and there's something else we need to talk about. You see, for far too long, the word ambition has been a dirty word for women. It's a word that conjures up negative associations with selfishness, ruthlessness, and a lack of compassion. As women, we're often discouraged from pursuing our dreams. We're told to be satisfied with less, don't make waves, put others first. We're taught that ambition is a trait to be ashamed of, something unseemingly and unbecoming for a woman. But I think this couldn't be further from the truth. Ambition is a powerful force for good. It's a driving force that can change the world, and it is what has propelled women through history to fight for their rights, to break barriers, and to shatter glass ceilings. It's what's enabled women to achieve great things, to make a difference and have a lasting impact on the world. So let us embrace our ambition, let's cultivate it, let's use it to create a better future for ourselves, our daughters, our sons. It's not a dirty word. I think it's really a source of strength, resilience, and of hope. We need to establish a national evaluation framework to guide national decision-making, particularly around workplace culture, promoting women to be more visible in the media and our boardrooms, and providing real role models. Real role models. And what do I mean by that? I mean not just the women who have survived the experience, and the reason that they are survived and are in that level E position is because they worked like a man and came back to work when their baby was 6 weeks old because they had them under the lab bench. And, I love to hear those stories, but I also want the real. I want to know how we're changing and supporting real infrastructure change. So there's much work to be done. When I started my lab, I left Peter Mac in 2016 and was starting my lab, and it was at this point that I met my now dear friend Ruth Mitchell, who's a neurosurgeon. She spends her days removing brain tumours from what was adults, and now she's now a paediatric neurosurgeon. I should point out, actually, and this is Kate Drummond, who's the professor of neurosurgery across the road at RMH. And only we think we've got it bad, ladies. 9% of neurosurgeons are female. 9%. This needs to change. And when I started my lab, Ruth said to me, "I'm sick of telling my patients they're going to die. Someone needs to do something about this." We're throwing all this brain tumour tissue into the bin. No one wants it. No one wants to work on brain cancer. Looking back, it was a serendipitous conversation between two friends, but I also now reflect on this as a real turning point in my career. She'd also been lobbying a very talented postdoc in my lab, Ryan Cross, up the back there, who I co-runs my lab with me. So she was a very successful advocate, wasn't she, Ryan? I think this is the other take-home message, is that surround your life with people who inspire you and who you learn from. Because this was a whole new area of research. It was going to take a lot of courage. I didn't know anything about brain cancer. Sometimes the most valuable things you can do are not easy. It took a lot of grit. In fact, I was reading a book when I was on holiday in January, laying on a beach, sipping a cocktail out of a coconut. And I read this book, Grit, that just came out, I think, late last year, by Angela Duckworth. And she argues that, talent and intelligence are not the only factors that determine success, but in fact, grit, a combination of passion and perseverance and the ability to stick with long-term goals in the face of obstacles and setbacks, that's really what it takes. And her research includes studies from athletes and artists and musicians and business leaders, and that grit is something that can be learned through deliberate practice and a growth mindset. And also emphasising the value in failing, that we actually, failing is good. Failing helps us learn, right? And so I failed. I failed miserably. I mean, I started the lab, I've had a blank canvas, and Doug said, go and do great science. Go and do great science. Okay. Can I have some pipettes? Can I have with literally blank canvas? And so, that first year I wrote 21 grants. 21. The second year I wrote 12. We and recruited Ryan from the Peter Mac, and we made every cell line, mice, we made everything from scratch, and we established a whole new program of brain cancer research in the precinct. I recruited a small and talented team of men and women to help achieve this vision. And as a team, we quickly realised that our expertise and our connections with the local Melbourne neurosurgery team were the perfect marriage, scientifically speaking. And these are just some of the incredible women I work with in the Brain Cancer Centre. So to really tackle this devastating disease, we were going to need a new super weapon in the fight against cancer. And of course, that's women. Here's Melinda. She's down. She here? Okay, she is. Give everyone a wave. She's our mouse resident neurosurgeon. So she gives the mice brain tumours and then we cure them. Anyway, that's the plan. But starting a lab definitely takes the same mindset and grit as starting your own business. Not only do you have to find your own niche that's separate from your PIs, certainly would never work on anything that my previous supervisors had worked on. So I had to find my own niche. It has to be different. You have to ask your own research questions. And so we were determined to build a program about using immunotherapy to fight brain cancer. But to do this, we had to connect with a lot of people to support this bold plan. We talked to philanthropists. We talked to people that had lost their children. Oh, still get emotional every time I think about it. We connected to celebrities. We talked to politicians. And so with a $40 million investment, we were able to establish a brain cancer centre. And so now I lead the immunotherapy arm of that. But of course, we knew it was going to take more than just immunotherapy. We needed a whole program. We needed to understand how to get drugs across the blood-brain barrier and to work with with biochemists. I needed to work with bioinformaticians. We needed to understand the tumour. So we needed to work very closely with our clinical colleagues, and through BPOP, we opened the first phase 0 trial in the world for brain cancer just across at RMH. So it's been quite a journey. And one of my mentors, Doug Hilton, once told me that I needed to foster my own career narrative. He said, be in control of your own career and do great science, but have another parallel in your career. And he really supported me in that because as I said, being a founding member of WISP and doing a lot of Indigenous health and education work on the side, I wanted to do both, and I wanted to find a way that I could figure out how to do both as a leader and a mentor, and to still have time to devote to advocacy and issues that were really important to me in Indigenous health and education, but building a lab at the same time. I had to really quickly learn how to get the best out of them, sitting up there in the back row. And I think, that there's this assumption, I guess I embraced the authenticity paradox in a lot of ways, which is, a leadership style embraced by, or sort of coined by Hermania Ibarra, that involves balancing the need for authenticity and vulnerability with the need for authority and power. And, I think this style of leadership can be applied to science in several ways. You know, we are to be authentic and true to ourselves. It means being honest about our strengths and weaknesses. I'm always very open and honest about the things I don't know. Being transparent about decision-making processes. And it also means being open to feedback and willing to learn from others. It means making tough decisions. It means setting clear expectations, and it also means holding people accountable. It means being able to communicate effectively and inspire others to follow your lead. And sometimes these systems can punish us for being authentic. But what I love about science is you don't have to go to a fancy, expensive school to be a scientist. Science is and should be the ultimate meritocracy. It's focus and ability that counts, and not money and connections. And I'm privileged to have a really fun career. I absolutely love what I do. I bounce out of bed every day to come into the lab, and love the fact that, you know, WeHi does value my leadership, not just in the lab, but has also given me the space to support and continue my work in the community, navigating both worlds, both the mainstream bureaucracy of universities through to working with Indigenous people and communities. And that kind of experience, like board directorship, you know, really changed my perspective and taught me how to run my lab like a business a little bit, actually. You know, my lab has revenue and expenditure. It has assets, which of course are the people, the biggest asset. It has a strategic plan. My lab has a strategic plan. It has stakeholders. It has lines of reporting. It's collaborative. My lab has a strong positive culture. It has a model of democratic leadership. It has inclusive values. So the formula's working so far. Well, my lab's here today. You can have to ask them at the morning tea break, but I think it is possible. So in closing, I know we're at time. What I love about science is that it could be a level playing field. And as an Indigenous woman, I know that the fight for equity and inclusion extends beyond gender. We must also stand proud with our sisters. And our trans sisters who face discrimination based on race, ethnicity and sexuality and gender identity. And only by working together can we really build on the achievements of our sisters and our matriarchs who paved the way to create a world where all women, regardless of their background or an identity, have an equal opportunity to thrive and succeed. So on this International Women's Day, let us all continue to strive for a world where we can all pursue our dreams and make our marks in science and beyond. Thank you.
Misty, you're an absolute powerhouse. Thank you so much. That was such an amazing talk. I'm sure there's comments, questions. Anyone want to raise their hand? I think we've got a comment on Menti while people are thinking.
Got a comment on Menti. Just want to acknowledge a brilliant and thought-provoking, challenging, sobering and entertaining presentation from Associate Professor Jenkins.
Oh, thank you.
Who else has a comment or a question?
I was worried it was going to be too much. No, it was perfect.
Okay.
None. Silent.
All right.
All sold.
Like, what was that? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I might keep you for one quick one.
Okay.
Chair's privilege. So I think a lot of us are starting to really think a lot more deeply about how we embrace intersectionality in a lot of this equity work that we're doing. And I'm just wondering, like, from some of the experience that you've had with working with Indigenous populations, what's kind of coming up that we can start rolling out in our own organisations here to better address that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because get ready for it, because it's coming. And I say this in all genuine seriousness to Shelley as well, because this year, in fact, I was on a panel initiated by the Victorian government to address the Victorian Indigenous health and medical research agenda. And so Victoria is the only state in Australia that doesn't have an Indigenous ethics committee. So scientists can write applications to NHMRC and do Indigenous stuff, Indigenous research, without ever an Indigenous eye looking at the proposal. And so they want to bring in an accord. And so what that will mean is that there will have to be a process that they are looking at. So they're currently open to looking for feedback on that proposed model right now. And so I think, there's certainly a really big role that our organisations can play in that. And then also I think, we talked about the gender tax in terms of to achieve equity in our leadership. When you look at the scissor graph like this and you have 25 or 30% of your leadership being female, but you want equity across your committees, of course, you pay the gender tax. And the intersectionality of that is, of course, when you layer whatever the, whether they, the other kinds of inclusion committees we have, or reconciliation plans, for example, then, I sit on all of those committees, and then then I'm also the voice that's meeting with the community members and driving the institutional agenda at a state level. And so, that places a really big burden of workload. And so what that means in a day-to-day basis is, supporting our intersectional leaders in our organisations so that they can share their knowledge and contribute to those processes in a meaningful way without it negatively deficiting their career. And I think if we can do that as organisations, then we can progress in a really meaningful way, and we can hold our leaders up that are doing amazing work in this space, whether it's gender, disability, queers in science, whatever. So.
Great. Thanks so much, Misty.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's thank Misty again. It was amazing, really inspiring. Okay, so we're at morning tea break now. So please go out to the atrium, go on your left door. And we also have an International Women's Day portrait photography exhibition, Embracing Equity, displayed out there. Please have a look. It's amazing. And there's various quotes on their career, leadership and success. We're really trying to highlight diverse leadership and role models at Peter Mac. So, yeah, please check it out. And we will reconvene here in 25 minutes.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We're going to get started. Rob, Mark, Misty, sit down. Just because you're a gender champion, doesn't mean you get to holding us up from this train has to keep moving, and we've got some amazing stuff coming up after morning tea. This has been such an exciting morning so far. And so thank you very much for all coming back into the room, and welcome back to our second session. Thank you everybody who has remained tuned in online. We hope that you are enjoying our morning as much as we are here in person. And reminder, please post questions and comments to Menti. It's just so great to see everybody having morning tea together in person. It really has a completely different vibe to running an entirely virtual seminar or symposium. So it really is wonderful. And now, very excitingly, we get to hear from both of our Lear medalists this morning about their research. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Katie Fennell, who's going to be presenting her work, hopefully about splinter, so that people like me can also be brought up to speed. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I first just want to start by acknowledging how special it is to be meeting here and working on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. But I also just want to remind everyone that we are living and working on stolen lands and recognise that First Nation sovereignty has never been ceded. So today I'm going to be giving you an overview of my work over the last 5 years or so into non-genetic evolution, and give you a little taste of where I'd like to take my research career in the next few years. And Shelley, I'm going to be quizzing you on splinter after this. Okay, so I've always been really interested in clonal biology in the context of cancer, and how we can actually find better methods to study clonal behaviour. And so here you can see in this classical view of tumour evolution, starting from a single cell, we have the diversification of clones and subclones over time. And this leads to certain cells that have different properties, such as the ability to evade therapeutic pressure or to spread to other organs. And as a result of this evolutionary process, we generate significant clonal heterogeneity. And clonal heterogeneity is a huge problem as it results in disease relapse. And so this is a huge barrier in overcoming cancer. And we've long thought of this process to be driven solely by genetic mutations. And so a lot of us know in this room that cancer, of course, is a disease of the genome. Both mutations and copy number variations initiate and drive the evolution of cancer. What we also know from normal tissues is that we have a variety of different cell types, and these arise from basically just a single identical genome. And the same is true in cancer. We have all of these mutation-independent layers of regulation, and these can all work in combination to generate significant non-genetic heterogeneity and also cellular plasticity. So cellular plasticity is the process whereby cells can actually switch their states and change their behaviour without an underlying change to the genome. And over the last decade, we've really started to acknowledge that in addition to mutations, both non-genetic heterogeneity and cellular plasticity can also drive tumour evolution. And so how do we actually go about studying non-genetic heterogeneity, given that it's not hardwired into the genome in the same way that mutations are? So there's a lot of different ways that we could do this, but actually a really good way to study clones is by using something called cellular DNA barcoding. And this is where we can label founding clones, each with a unique genetic tag, and this is inherited by all the daughter cells of those founding clones. We can apply our chosen evolutionary pressure, and we can actually trace these clones over time. And by sequencing the DNA barcodes, we can look at the clonal output and survival in response to the evolutionary pressure. But during the process of sequencing these barcodes, with some of the older techniques, we'd actually have to lyse the sample and we would lose RNA from these cells. And what this means is that we couldn't actually get a phenotypic process behind why these cells actually survived this therapeutic pressure. On the other hand, we have single-cell RNA sequencing technologies. These are really good at giving us phenotypic information. This is only a snapshot over time. And this lineage information is not well preserved at all. And so it can actually be hard to track clones serially over time. And so we decided to combine these two methodologies and we developed a single cell lineage tracing tool, which we have called Splinter. And here I'd like to give a huge shout out to Dane. He's a postdoc in Mark's lab where I did my PhD, and him and I worked on this side by side for about 5 years. And Dane pioneered all of the bioinformatics workflows in this project. And so how Splinter works is that we have a EF1 alpha promoter, and that drives a fluorescent protein. And then the 3' UTR of the fluorescent protein is a 60 base pair barcode. When these barcodes are lentivirally integrated into cells, they're transcribed by Pol2 to create polyadenylated mRNA. And what this means is that we can actually capture these in standard 3' single cell RNA sequencing workflows. And so now what we have is we have our lineage information through the express barcode along with the whole transcriptome of that cell. And so now what we can do is we can label our founding clones that we're interested in. Lineage information is preserved through cell division. And because the barcodes are expressed, we can look at the transcriptional profiles of these clones and how they actually change during the course of cancer evolution. And so here I'm just giving you a brief overview of experimental design used in a typical Splinter experiment to find the transcriptional determinants of clonal behavior. So what you can do is take your chosen cell line, you can label it with the Splinter barcode library so that each cell has a single barcode. We then let these cells expand for a number of population doublings. And this is really important because what this means is we can take most of the cells into our experiment. But what we can also do is actually save some cells and store these down for this critical baseline time point, and we can come back to these for future analysis. And that will be important in just a second. So then with our barcode labeled cells, we can apply our favorite selection pressure, whether that be transplantation into mice or drug treatment. And at the end of the selection pressure, we can harvest the cells that actually survive this. And through sequencing the Splinter barcodes at the end, we can identify cells that have become the most dominant. And then what we can do is actually go back to this sample that we stored down at baseline. We can find the barcodes and we can see what was actually different about those cells that allowed for this clonal dominance under this specific evolutionary pressure. And so the ultimate goal here is to find transcriptional signatures or non-genetic signatures that can actually predict clonal behavior. And so what we decided to do was investigate non-genetic evolution in acute myeloid leukemia. And so what we did was use our Splinter barcodes to label genetically stable leukemia cells, and we transplanted these into mice. And what we wanted to do here was identify the clones that cause disease and see if we could actually find something that was transcriptionally different about these clones. And so when our mice got sick, we sequenced to the barcodes from their cells, and we could identify the ones that were actually associated with disease. And then, as I was saying earlier, we can go back to that baseline sample that we'd stored down. We could search through our single-cell RNA sequencing data and actually find those disease barcodes. We could identify the dominant clones, and then we could compare these to the clones that didn't dominate to see if there was something different about these prior to transplantation. And so we were actually quite surprised to see that in our genetically identical cells, there was actually a pre-existing gene expression signature that did mark these disease clones prior to the onset of them being transplanted into mice. And as you can see here from the single cell UMAP, the dominant clones are enriched all together in this top corner, and they largely cluster away from the clones that didn't dominate. And so when we delved a bit deeper into the gene expression signatures that were actually dictating this process, we found lots of genes that were both upregulated and downregulated in the dominant clones. But one gene that really stuck out to us was this gene called SLPy. Now, this is mine and Dane's favourite gene after this project now. So we were really interested in SLPy for a number of reasons. One, SLPy had never been before associated with leukemia before, so we were kind of wondering what role it played. But also, as you can appreciate, this really nice clustering pattern with our dominant clones, it's really highly expressed in these clones prior to transplantation. Also, I'm just giving you an overview of the experiments today, but Dane and I did many, many, many experiments for this work. And we found that every time we did this, SLPy came out as our #1 most upregulated gene in our dominant clones. And so to actually validate a role for SLPy in having a functional role in leukemia, what we decided to do was use CRISPR-Cas9 to actually knock out SLPy in our leukemia cells and then transplant these into mice to see what would happen. And we actually found that SLPy, mice that receive cells that don't have SLPy, so SLPy is now knocked out, they actually had a significantly increased survival to those that received just wild-type SLPy cells. And so I think this really highlights that Splinter can find new regulators of cell behavior that we can validate that we might not be able to find with more traditional bulk sequencing technologies or older technologies, and we could potentially target these in the future. And so based on this work and based on our design of Splinter, there are now a number of projects using Splinter both in the precinct and further afield, and I just wanted to highlight a few of them here. And I guess this really just highlights the diversity of Splinter, the utility of Splinter for looking at clonal behavior in both normal systems such as normal hematopoiesis, but also in lots of different cancer models as well. And so just finally, I think when we often do projects, we answer a lot of questions with those projects, but we're actually always left with other questions as well. And so when I was wrapping up this project, something that always really intrigued me was why in these genetically identical cells did we have some cells that had high levels of SLPy, and this actually gave them a different behavior to those that didn't have SLPy at all? And how do cells kind of move in and out of those states? What's the process that's driving that? And so I really want to tackle this question for my postdoc, but in the broader context of cancer. And I think the ultimate goal here is, you know, if we can find the mechanisms and therefore the pathways of cellular plasticity, the hope is that we could maybe one day treat patients to either reverse these plastic cells or actually eliminate these plastic cells altogether. And because cellular plasticity plays such a key role in both drug resistance and metastasis, the goal of reversing or eliminating these cells is actually to improve patient outcomes in the future. And of course, I would like to say a lot of thank yous. So the Splinter work was done in the laboratories of Mark Dawson and Charlene. Again, I'd just like to say thanks to Dane for all the hard work that we did together on this project. Everyone in both of those labs. I would like to say thanks to all the amazing core facilities that we have here at Peter Mac and also at WeHi that made this possible. Couldn't have done it without them. I want to say thank you to my funding sources, and I'd like to say thank you to my postdoc supervisor, Mel, and I'm really excited to see where we can take our research in the future, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fennell. That was a really illuminating presentation, and I think as someone, I think it's important to acknowledge the diversity of research that we conduct here at Peter Mac. When someone has such well-developed science communication skills as you just demonstrated here, it means that we can all appreciate and understand the significance of the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we now have time for probably a question. Is there anything on Menti? Nothing. Has anyone in the room got a question for Katie? Or Shelley or David? Thank you, David.
Great talk, Katie. I'd be interested in getting your thoughts then on what types of experiments could be done to try to manipulate the level of plasticity of the individual clones.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the unique thing about cellular plasticity is, as I was saying, they the cells can kind of change their phenotype without that underlying change to the genome. So I think we do have a really unique opportunity here where they are more malleable in a sense than maybe mutationally driven cells. And so I think in order to actually target these cells and manipulate that plasticity, it's going to be a challenge because they are inherently plastic, so they could actually then change again to our therapy that we're trying to manipulate them through. And so the way that I see it is that we're going to have to use our research to find these mechanisms and then use it in the context of other therapies as well. So I don't think we're ever just going to be able to treat cellular plasticity in isolation due to how quickly evolvable these cells are. So I think we're going to have to use careful combinations of therapy to both target the bulk of the tumour, maybe with chemotherapy or immunotherapy, and then overlay on that therapies that can kind of dampen down that plasticity to then allow other therapies to come on top. So that's kind of where I see it going.
Any other questions? All right, we might thank you.
Thank
Dr.
you
Bell very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, we are going to now hear from Dr. Annette Lim, and it is my great pleasure to reintroduce Dr. Annette Lim, who has generously recorded her presentation for us today. And everybody, send good vibes my way and comms team, just keep the space bar. Or maybe not. Click on a photo.
Thank you for this opportunity to share about some of my research. I'm passionate about making breakthroughs for my patient with cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas. Cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas are a skin cancer that is most prevalent in Australia and most common cancers worldwide. Risk factors for this type of skin cancer are ubiquitous that all of us are exposed to, including increasing age, sun exposure, and having pale skin. In fact, I'm sure that most of you here in the room will know someone who's been to the doctors to get something on their skin burnt off, which may have been a skin cancer. But paradoxically, because the cancer is so common, it gets neglected. No cancer registry collects data on it, so we don't even know how much it costs us as a nation. But we do know that these cancers are the most common cause for cancer-related hospitalisations in Australia. There is so much more we can do to prevent people developing these type of skin cancers. All of you would have heard of the slip, slop, slap sun protection campaigns, but how many parks and schools or outdoor areas do you still see without trees or shade? With legislative change, we can prevent and minimise this type of cancer and work towards reversing the cultural and systemic neglect of this very common disease. For those of you who are confronted by images of cancer, you may wish to close your eyes for the next slide, which demonstrates the morbidity of cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas. Given the risk of UV sun exposure, the head and neck subsite is the most common area to develop cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas. And given the functionally aesthetic area of the head and neck, these photos of a few of our patients show you how the cancer can significantly impact a person's appearance, nutrition, swallow, speech and vision. The middle patient is in his 20s, and for the last patient on the photo on the right-hand side of the slide, it was her first cancer. However, most patients with these skin cancers have multiple lesions throughout their life and require multiple hospital attendances. I am proud to be part of a group of international clinicians who have pioneered the use of immunotherapy for the treatment of cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas, with dramatic response rates, durable disease control, and improved quality of life, leading to PBS reimbursement for patients with advanced or metastatic disease. In fact, all of the patients in the previous photo I've shown you have completed treatment now with no evidence of disease. We have also recently published the success of receiving 4 doses of immunotherapy prior to surgery, showing that 50% of patients have 100% complete disappearance of their cancer by the time of surgery, with a further 13% with less than 10% residual cancer. So clinical practice is changing at an exciting pace for the better. However, 50% of patients with cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas will have their cancer not respond to immunotherapy. So we need to change this by identifying cancer characteristics that help us identify upfront which cancers will and will not respond to immunotherapy, so we can personalise treatment, improve cure rates and avoid side effects related to other treatments. The research supported by this Leah Medal is part of our research program here, which will investigate a large cohort of cancer samples from patients who have received immunotherapy, assembled via a national Australian collaboration with other centres with experience treating this skin cancer. We also have a unique and special opportunity to analyse cancer tissue collected after death, facilitated by our generous participants and families, and the wonderful Cascade team here at Peter Mac, who provide the crucial opportunity for the collection of cadaveric cancer tissue. With a team of world-leading and dedicated scientists I work with on the project, we will be analysing the tumour samples with cutting-edge, innovative methodology pioneered by a collaborator in our research team. This technology facilitates single-cell resolution of cell-to-cell interactions in archival tissues. So you can see which single cancer cell and other cancer cells interact, or other types of cells interact, how they interact, and what genes drive the positive or negative interaction. We have a unique opportunity to unlock crucial biological information about what molecular processes drive resistance and response to immunotherapy. So one day we might be able to pick what cancers respond to immunotherapy up front. This award will assist our endeavour to champion the needs of patients who often have the literal inability to speak up for themselves due to the impacts of cancer and their treatment. I'm proud to say that the research I've presented here represents the tireless work of a dedicated team of healthcare professionals and scientists who work every day in the hope of finding something that will make the world a better place for the next patient. And I'm confident that breakthroughs can be achieved through research like this. Thank you for listening and partnering our team on the journey to achieve the goal to improve outcomes for cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma patients. And in the meantime, please don't forget your hat, sunscreen and shade, as I don't want to see any of you in clinic.
Okay, so thanks so much to Annette for taking the time to record the presentation. Again, it's such a shame that she couldn't be here today to celebrate with us all, but yeah, it's amazing we could still hear of her research. So we'll now hear from Peter Mac's biomedical animator, Dr. Maya Divyak. So Maya's Peter Mac's inaugural biomedical animator and has been revolutionising the way that we can communicate and visualise our research. And her meticulous and mind-blowing and scientifically accurate animations have been winning awards all over the world. It's so impressive. And we're really excited to hear from you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laurie, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for the wonderful opportunity to speak today at this incredible event. The energy in the room is just amazing. So we're going to get all visual now, and I'm going to talk about biomedical animation. A lot of you will know what that is, but for those of you that don't, I'll give you a quick tour de force of what it is. Biomedical animation uses 3D animation techniques from cinema. So as you would have seen throughout Hollywood movies you've been watching for the last 20 or 30 years, to explain biology. And in doing so, it accelerates understanding because it unfolds before your very eyes. And it interests people in science because they can understand it, because they can see it. And it shows us just how beautiful biology is. And as you can see from those 4 images, biology is incredibly beautiful. And that's what gets me out of bed each day, the fact that I get to come to this place and play around with these beautiful molecules and tell their stories to the world. So why is biomedical animation actually important? As you're probably aware, 60% of our brain is devoted to processing visual information or performing vision-related tasks. So we're visual creatures, and we have been since the day we scanned our environment in search of food. But these days, with the invention of the internet and the absolute rise and dominance of social media, we are becoming ever more visually focused. So visual strategies are therefore the best approach for engaging audiences with science. Why else is it important? It is really important for connecting the research lab with the public. So you might be aware that a lot of people that are not scientists think that scientists are kind of strange, odd people. They wear white lab coats and they do odd things behind closed doors with their tax dollar. And we really need to open the lines of communication to better explain what it is that scientists are actually doing behind those closed doors. And biomedical animation does this. It actually provides a window on what scientists are doing in the lab. And at Peter Mac, biomedical animation is really important because it enables our patients and the public to understand molecular processes. So we have a whole universe of molecules inside a whole universe of cells inside our body, and then we have a whole universe of molecules inside those cells. And they're all jostling around and interacting and communicating with one another. And that happens without us having to think about it and without us even being aware of it much of the time, or all of the time, really. And these molecules inside our cells, they enable our cells to function, to communicate with one another, to divide, to repair, and to die. And so biomedical animation makes us aware of the molecular world, and it connects us with the drama of our biology that can sometimes go completely off script and lead to situations such as cancer. So for me, biomedical animation is all about inclusion. It's about bringing those without any scientific knowledge or medical knowledge along for the ride. It brings them into the world of biology, and even if they don't engage with the science, they're able to appreciate the beauty of it. But why is it really important? Chimeric antigen receptor T cells are an innovative new treatment that's currently only available at Peter Mac. So this is firing the imagination of people in Australia, in Victoria, in Melbourne, and they want to learn about it and they want to know more about it. So you could explain CAR T cells like this. Chimeric antigen receptors, or CARs, are produced on the surface of killer T cells. The CARs recognise the CD19 receptor on cancer cells via the binding domain, which consists of a scFv fragment of the anti-CD19 antibody. The signalling domain consists of a fusion of portions of the naturally occurring T cell receptor signalling domain, and so on and so forth, etc., etc. And this is the kind of response you're going to get. People are going to look at you in a completely confused kind of way. They're going to turn around 180 degrees and run in the opposite direction and wonder, well, why would I even care? Or you could show them this.
In the laboratory, T cells are instructed to produce special receptors called chimeric antigen receptors, or CARs, on their surface, making them into CAR T cells. The CARs consist of different components that occur naturally in cells, but which are never found together. The CARs sit on the surface of the cell and are engineered to recognise and attach to a patient's cancer cells via the binding domain. We will now move below the cell surface. Here, we are looking inside the CAR T cell at the CAR signalling domains. Once the CAR T cell is bound, CAR signalling domains begin a chain of events which activates its killer function to destroy cancer cells. A CAR is therefore a modular combination of cell recognition components and signalling components all in one. We are now looking at the magnified surface of a CAR T cell in contact with a cancer cell. Once they are in the body, the CARs can directly bind to specific markers on the patient's cancer cells, shown in yellow. The bound CARs then cluster together. We will now move below the cell membrane. Here, we are looking inside the CAR T cell at the CAR signalling domains. The binding interaction has activated the signalling domains, beginning a chain of events which activates the CAR T cell. Once activated, the green CAR T cells release toxic chemicals into the cancer cells, which kills them, indicated in red. CAR T cells are known as serial killers because they can kill, release, and move on to kill other cancer cells in a cycle that can occur multiple times. This makes them very effective in the fight against cancer.
And that was an excerpt from our latest production, CAR T cells, engineered cancer killers. And you can see that that's a completely different situation, isn't it? It makes really complex science quite accessible. And people remain engaged because it's interesting to look at and they're quite intrigued by it. So I was asked to talk a bit about my career trajectory and how I came to be where I am today. So let's take a look at that. How did I become a biomedical animator? I went right through the academic system to postdoctoral level before I kind of came to the realisation that maybe a career in research wasn't for me. And then I moved sideways and went into scientific sales for a really long time, for about 10 years. And towards the end of that period, I became increasingly aware that my artistic side needed some kind of creative outlet. When I was at school, I studied fine art and French in addition to chemistry and biology. So there was always that artistic side to my nature, and that completely took a back seat while I was going through university and the academic system. And so I was asking this question, you know, where is the art? And I was trying to think of a way of bringing my two favourite things together, art and science, and I was really struggling with a way to achieve that. But as luck would have it, I met Dr. Drew Berry, who is a biomedical animator over at WeHi. That was in the course of my sales work. I just happened to be there doing my job one day, and I said to the receptionist, I'm really bored. I'm trying to think of a way of bringing art and science together. And she said, oh, you need to talk to Drew. So he showed me his work, and to me, it just seemed this perfect combination of scientific rigour and visual beauty. And that was the moment of epiphany for me. I was like, yep, this is what I want to do. So I set about retraining to become an animator. I went to Swinburne and studied multimedia and design. I then went to the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, also known as AFTRS, and I studied 3D animation there. And I started working on my own projects, getting together enough material to create a really nice portfolio, and then I was offered an 18-month fellowship with Drew over at WeHi, which is where I learned most of what I now know. And that's where I found the art. My first job after that was as science animator at the Gene Technology Access Centre next door to WeHi. And I'm currently the inaugural biomedical animator at Peter Mac, and I'm absolutely loving it. So let's take a look at what being a woman in this industry is like. You're probably aware that the visual effects and the computer graphics world is very male-dominated. A great example of this is Danielle Feinberg, who was recently awarded the Breaker of the Glass Ceiling Award for being literally the first female VFX supervisor at Pixar in 20 years. Now, this is a great accolade for Danielle. However, I really hope that Pixar are doing something to redress this imbalance. And when I first started out and I was learning the tools of my trade, I would go to tech sessions and I would be one of 2 or 3 women in a room full of 80 dudes, all wearing Technics t-shirts and skate pants. And quite a few years later, in 2013, when I actually started working full-time in this field, I was one of 3 women in SciViz out of about 20 in the whole of Australia. So that was 15%. And 10 years later, in 2023, I'm now one of 9 women out of about 21 people working in SciViz in Australia, or about 40%. So it's definitely improved in the last 10 years. But how does that compare with the world stage? Recently, I attended a conference called SIGGRAPH Asia, which was held in Daegu in South Korea. That was in early December. And SIGGRAPH is an acronym for Special Interest Group on Computer Graphics and Interactive Techniques. And it's a collective that dates back to the early 60s, and the SIGGRAPH Asia chapter spun out of that in 2008. So I was absolutely thrilled to have our CAR T production accepted there into the Computer Animation Festival. It was one of only 33 out of 405 submissions, so absolutely thrilled to be there. And it was the only science production there. Everything else was all narrative-based and character-based, which was great to see. So of the 3 keynotes, there were 3 keynotes, and they were all delivered by men. And over on the right there, you can see Luc Julia, who is the scientific director of Renault, explaining why there's no such thing as artificial intelligence, why there will never be fully autonomous driverless vehicles, and why he really doesn't like Elon Musk. There were 19 featured sessions, only 5 of which were delivered by women, and there were 6 business innovation sessions, all delivered by men. And the total number of female attendees was about 20 to 30%. So you can see that there's a definite disparity there. To their credit, though, they are doing something to change this and redress this imbalance. They've started diversity, equity and inclusion sessions as of 3 years ago. They discuss mental health matters in these sessions, representation in the workplace, how to bring the next generation into the fold, and how to actually include diversity, equity and inclusion projects in the education pipeline. They also have fantastic women in CG sessions, and one of them that I really loved was using X-ray techniques such as the synchrotron to determine the structure and composition of museum objects. And that was presented by Dr. Deborah Lawler-Dormer from the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. So that was a great session. Also, we've had June Kim elected conference chair for 2023, and she's the second woman since 2008 to be elected. So where's Peter Mac in this space? I'm absolutely thrilled to let you know that we're really way ahead of the curve in this regard. After all, I'm here doing what I do, which is fantastic. And it's clear that Peter Mac sees biomedical animation as a really important STEAM initiative. I'm really also delighted, as Shelley mentioned, that we are now using the STEAM acronym, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art and Maths, and not just plain old STEM, because as we've seen, the arts are so important for our collective development as a whole. And so what are we doing in this space? We are creating animations, as you've just seen. We are also creating interactive iPad resources for use in the clinic. And we are just about to commence a study using one of these resources in clinic to support mutant KRAS patients to understand their biology and how a cancer treatment may support them. So we're really excited about that. We've also created quite a few art exhibitions, including interactive stills and holograms. And again, we're way ahead of the curve. We're one of only 3 medical research institutes in the whole of Australia that are doing this. There's myself, there's Drew's group over at WeHi, and there is a woman in Queensland, Madeline Kirsting Flynn, who works at QIMR. The rest of the people working in this space are either freelancers or they're at the 3D visualisation and aesthetics laboratory at UNSW in Sydney. So I'd really like to say thank you so much to the Peter Mac Cancer Foundation for funding this initiative. And I'd really like to thank Professor Ricky Johnston and Dr. Carol Gins for listening to me when I came to them over 5 years ago and suggesting this as a gig for Peter Mac. So thank you for that. And yeah, I hope that you've been able to see that biomedical animation is the A in STEAM and is a tool for inclusion. These are some of the awards that we've won for the CAR-T production, and if you'd like to see it in its entirety, you can scan the QR code. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Didiak. That is it's such a fascinating area, and I'm sure many of us have benefited and enjoyed the animations that you have been producing over the last 5 years here at Peter Mac. It is absolutely another amazing science communication mechanism, really, and as you said, opens up science and the molecular aspects of science, particularly for such a broader audience than what we can through words. So, do we have time for a question? Maya, hang on.
I thought that was my signal.
No, that was just me commenting so that people could go.
I think what you do is so important, and it is a really great tool for science communication. And I wonder whether the organisation's thought about, mechanisms and strategies to kind of share this with the world. And I'm thinking, even our remote, when we've partnered with Deadly Science, and I could see, remote, like Indigenous communities and kids at schools in rural and remote areas really kind of getting behind this. Is there a strategy there?
Not a formal one, no. I do present a lot at high schools. I go along and give talks about, my career path and what animation is and so on. So I'm trying to bring it to young people in that way. But yeah, in terms of reaching out to Indigenous communities, no, there's nothing formal there, and I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'd love to be involved. Thank you.
So thank you, Misty. I was going to suggest something similar, and let's make that happen. I think today is all about, let's not go back, as I always say, to the farm and forget what we were going to do. So let's make sure that we do that. And I think the other area that, so the reason I believe in STEAM so much is because I absolutely know that we need art and culture in everything we do, including science. And having worked with lots of artists in London around explaining the cancer journey to people with cancer, I wonder if we can use your art in that way too, because it's quite, so there's the cellular area, but actually navigating that whole journey for people with cancer can be quite hard. And when I asked some students to help me at Goldsmith College in London, they did it like a tube map, and they did it in a way that I couldn't even, what we had was an algorithm of words that we expected people to read, and it was really hard. And so they did it all visually in a way that I couldn't have even conceived of. So I wonder if we can beg, borrow and steal you occasionally from the research laboratories and see if we can use your brain and your application to help people with cancer navigate.
Again, sounds like a fantastic idea. As I said, we're a visual society more and more.
Yeah.
And so being able to understand mechanisms, to look at process, to look at what's going on in our cells is really integral to appreciating what's going on, rather than having someone bombard you with words and jargon and technology, which just makes you retreat. Yeah. So being able to watch something unfold before your eyes is very empowering. Yeah. And I mean, of course, we need that jargon. That's the way scientists communicate with one another. But to bring everyone else along for the ride, we really need a visual process for achieving that. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree and see the need for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It's really great to have this active and interesting discussion as well that we can generate in this room. So it is now our pleasure to introduce our final speaker for the morning and our second keynote speaker, Associate Professor Cara Britt. Associate Professor Britt leads the Breast Cancer Risk and Prevention Lab at the Peter Mac, where her team focuses on the development of effective preventive strategies to lower breast cancer incidence. Today, she's going to speak to us about her research and her career path, and we've very much been looking forward to it this morning. So thank you, Associate Professor Britt.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me along. I've been to these events before, and I've always been blown away by everybody's different career paths and sort of the way they got to where they have. I'm not going to give you a talk, as we've just heard, about women in science and the things that we've faced, because I can't cover it any better than Misty just did. I'm not going to give you a talk about Splinter because I still don't really understand. No, I'm joking. But I can't deliver it as well as Katie did, and it's definitely not going to be as visually pleasing as you've just seen. But really, it's just going to be a bit of a run through my career path in cancer research, the importance of mentors. I didn't really have, as they say, like a mother in science or a father in science. So I just pulled a village around me. So I'm going to talk to you about my village, how I made them kind of come along with me, and how I made the most of being in amazing places like this. So for me, I'm also going to give you a little bit of a grit discussion. Where did it all start? I was the first person in my family to actually make it to university. So my parents were pretty stoked, and here's mum with me, you know, celebrating actually finally finishing. And they were pretty excited that I was doing biochemistry, not that my dad could pronounce it, but also immunology. Science really came easy to me, and I actually used to, bribe my parents to try and get things I wanted when I was little so I could get 100% of my science tests. But I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. But unfortunately for me, I had something that sort of hit me right between the eyes. Well, like turning off the whole thing. So when I was in my final year of undergraduate, My mother was diagnosed with ER-positive breast cancer. It was aggressive, it was through her lymph nodes, and at that time, chemotherapy isn't what it is today. There weren't any anti-nausea meds, and for a week, my dad and I would actually hold my mum up in bed so we could get water down so she could actually get the chemotherapy out and actually sort of, live a half-decent sort of week. That really, really touched me. Brought our family together, but it also made me go, wow, I know what I want to do. So luckily enough for me, even though my grades were slipping because I was helping my dad care for my mum at home, a lecturer at Monash came up to me at the time and said, what's going on? Your grades are slipping. You're always usually such a great student. And I told him what was happening at home. He said, well, have you thought about research? And I said, what? Because it wasn't really brought into our undergraduate like it is now. And so I went over to Monash Medical Centre because I was out at Monash Clayton at the time and it was nice and close, situational. And I actually met with some of the professors out there and started to talk about trying to do breast cancer research. And I went over and spoke to Professor Evan Simpson, who at the time was leading a team looking at the effects of aromatase, or the enzyme that makes estrogen, on breast cancer, and especially, I guess, ER-positive breast cancer, which is the most common form of breast cancer. And I wanted to work with him on breast cancer, but he said that project was taken. Jock Finlay was also working at the Institute at the time, and these two were director and co-director, and he worked on the ovary. And so together they'd come up with an honours project that they wanted me to work on, which was marrying the two. So looking at the effects of estrogen on the ovary. And, I wasn't that convinced, but then Evan said to me, I'll let you go to all the breast cancer conferences if you come and work on it. And so I'm like, oh, okay. But then I fell in love with it. And so my PhD actually ended up being on assessing the functional significance of estrogen on the ovary. I'm just going to give you a few slides of science, right? Because it was a PhD, it took a long time. I'm just going to give you 2 slides. That's kind of depressing for me, right? So the findings from my PhD in 2 slides, cry, is that estrogen controls follicular genesis, but it also controls somatic cell differentiation. And so on the left-hand side, I'm just showing you some photomicrographs of a normal ovary, and it looks kind of pretty normal. You've got some beautiful follicles in there. And then the aromatase knockout or estrogen deficient ovary, and you can see that it's got blood-filled hemorrhagic cysts, and it's got all these areas that kind of look a little bit weird. Their cytoplasms are really big, looks a little bit like cancer when we think about it. And the more we went in to sort of look at this, we found that there was a block in follicular genesis. But this is, I think, where my ability to pull in people sort of really started. My PhD supervisors were running the institute. They were also never there. So if I wanted to do anything, I needed to do it myself. So I pulled in somebody who could help me do follicular genesis, and I learned how to do counting of follicles in a really darkened room on a microscope for many, many hours. But I pulled in the expert at Monash at the time and learned how to do it. We found that the ovary underwent transdifferentiation, and I'll get to the really exciting part in just a second, but essentially I needed to find out who was an expert in sex determination, and at the time Vince Harley was at my institute, and then also who was an expert at electron microscopy. So I went back to Monash, I went to Jeff Kerr and asked him for help. And so again, I'm just pulling in the expertise that I needed because I needed to answer the right question. So it took me many, many years in an electron microscopy room trying to get exactly the right image, which is why I'm showing it to you today. I've got to let go of it. But essentially, you can see on the left-hand side is like a picture that I made way before we had animation tools to kind of help us do this. But essentially, here's a testis, and it's showing you Sertoli cells. They support the development of sperm, and then underneath them we have Leydig cells, which pump out the testosterone, which actually help to keep the Sertoli cells viable. On the other side, we can actually see in the picture that there's a granulosa cell, which is the cell that's supporting the egg development in the ovary, and then underneath that a thecal cell. What we were finding is in the absence of estrogen, your ovaries were turning into testes. Pretty full on, right? So here's our ovary here on the left-hand side, the aromatase knockout ovary. It was actually looking a lot more like a testis, as you can see here. And it had these ectoplasmic specializations, which are junctional proteins that are only found in between 2 Sertoli cells and never found within granulosa cells. And then we also found these whorls of endoplasmic reticulum, as you can see here, that are only ever present within the testis. And so that was like pretty awesome. We were finding that it was controlling, really key points of differentiation. But this is also a really poignant time because I worked hard. I published, I presented at conferences, and I hid out in the lab a lot, like Kylie mentioned before. But I also, that allowed me to go to conferences, to put myself forward, get abstracts selected for oral presentations, and to meet people, gods in my field, right? And so I met with Professor Ken Korak because he was a mate of my PhD supervisor through going to the endocrine conferences. through going to the, sorry, it's not working. Okay, from going to the, having 2 supervisors, going to the reproductive conferences, I also got to meet other people such as David Handelsman and Professor Wendy Ingham. I'm writing a grant now with David Handelsman, and Professor Wendy Ingham and I have published many papers together. It also helped me begin a different journey, and that was the one of science communication. So Mum had been through breast cancer. I was in medical research. I wasn't yet in breast cancer. I was still working on the ovary, but I was talking about all of the work that was happening in my lab, in Evan's lab. And I found this a really great, I think, cathartic thing for Mum and I sort of to talk about the journey, but also to sort of get medical research out there. I think it probably also helped me just in terms of public speaking. So as I mentioned, I worked hard. I got a fellowship that allowed me to go overseas, and I went to start my journey in breast cancer research, and I was stoked. And I went to the Institute of Cancer Research, which was awesome because it's a whole institute like this that's like just focused on cancer. And I went to the Breakthrough Breast Cancer Centre. So my whole department was just breast cancer. So like I was ringing Mum going, oh my God, it's like amazing. She's like, you're such a nerd. But I worked with Alan Ashworth, and it kind of is, it'll get a bit funny what happens next, right? But essentially, he was one of the people that originally discovered BRCA2. So here's me walking in going, oh my gosh, thank you for letting me come and work with you. So the postdoc was great. Anyone that does do an overseas postdoc knows that it's, it's a really special time in your career. I got 3 papers out of it, but I think there was more that I learned out of that in terms of my journey. And one of those was going to the Friday 8 a.m. clinical meetings. It was only me and another scientist from the whole of the department that went along to them. But I think it really sort of stood me in good stead because I'm actually meeting people who are running clinical trials. I'm listening to the clinical problems, and I'm starting out early to understand that translational feeling that we all have here now. But unfortunately, that had to come to an end. I had to return home. If you've heard me give a science talk, I kind of waffle on about ER-positive cancer quite a lot. Estrogen receptor-positive cancer, yes, it's kind of good prognosis. As you can see here, it's not as bad as triple negative. But actually, if you look at the ER-positive cancers that have lymph node involvement, and you look many, many years out, as you can see here, up to 20 years, they actually still have a bad prognosis. Okay, the cancers come back. It's just that it takes a long time. Unfortunately, it came back in 2008 for my mum. And so I came home. And instead of going to the Garvan, where I was supposed to return on my CJ Martin, I came back to Melbourne because I wanted to be with Mum. I wanted to have every Sunday night with family and enjoying that. Unfortunately, in 2010, my mother passed away, and it hit the family like you can imagine, right? How do you lose your mentor, the brick in the household? And it's changed everything about, I guess, the way that I work, but also our family as well. But I've continued, I think, to sort of turn some positives out of it. And so the year after my mum passed away, I got my first early career fellowship from the National Breast Cancer Foundation. And I worked with them to talk about the journey, to talk about losing my mum, to talk about trying to save, everybody else's mum or their sisters or, blah, blah, blah. I helped them through videos, through radio interviews, through talks at Mother's Day Classic, even though I was probably still quite raw from my mother's death and pretty nervous standing in front of all those people at the Mother's Day Classic. But it helped me to heal. It helped me to increase breast cancer funding for MBCF. I've now got a leadership role at MBCF, which I think probably has come from all of that sort of close work that I did with them. And hopefully it's helped me become a better public speaker. So I mentioned just before that finding clinical colleagues is actually quite important in those early times that I was going to those Friday 8 a.m. meetings. So back in the old building in 2012, I joined Robert Anderson's lab. And I think Robin has sort of mentored quite a few of us that are here today, and she's really great because she allows you to have your independence while also being a really cool mentor for you. And she's just an awesome human. So together with Robin, we would attend the breast unit meetings, right? And there's only a couple of us that would go along from the science labs there, but we would go for 30 minutes every Wednesday, and that allowed me to actually get some really cool collaborators. So I met with Prue Francis, Kelly Phillips and Stephen Fox, and I've now written grants for all of these people. Some of them have been successful and now we're publishing papers. So that's actually really awesome. It also gave me an awareness of the clinical problems again, not just the ones that were scientifically interesting for me. So as you can see here, like those collaborations have actually been quite great. Not only have they allowed us to get grant funding together, but also now I can go to Prue Francis, Kelly Phillips and Shireen Loy when I've got a question that clinically I can't answer, or when I'm trying to understand how the pharma company will work with me, if I can sort of just tell them how important my experiments are. So it's just been amazing. So mentors come in all different shapes and sizes. I've assembled a team around me because I didn't really have one that was, I wasn't following anybody and their area of research. I knew what I wanted to do, but they've all given me different things. Okay, so, I know from my, mentors that I had as actually supervisors, it's a different kind of science training, right? But then I've also pulled in people that would just give me career advice, people who would, tell it to me straight when I was doing practice interviews, things like that. So if you feel like you don't have a mentor, I didn't either, just look to who you want to be your mentors and go and ask them. They'll probably be stoked. So I can't believe that we've got this breast cancer risk and prevention lab, because you can see where I've come from. Prevention research is really, really, really important to me. And to have a team with me now that are just like such awesome, intelligent people, also very passionate and lovely to each other is actually great. And as you can see, kind of gender balance, so we're getting there. And then, I'm not going to go into the science, but I just wanted to, give a plug for the research that we're all doing. There's three main areas. We're looking at the biological changes that are associated with ER-positive cancer. We're trying to understand how immunotherapy could actually be used earlier on in the process for prevention, and then also developing the models so that we can do the preclinical research that we would like to do. So in terms of our breast cancer initiation work, we're really trying to understand the cancer cells of origin for ER-positive cancer, coming back again, I guess, to my mother passing away from ER-positive cancer. And we want to understand how the risk factors that you can see here on the graph, such as obesity, alcohol, hormonal exposure, age, impact the normal breast so that we can then hopefully develop preventatives. And I mentioned that, these early mentors are going to pop up again. Now I'm writing a grant with a professor that's got a expertise in steroidogenic analysis. So this is from, early PhD days I've met him. In terms of our immune work, we're really trying to understand how we know that we can use immunotherapies for the invasive cancer, but we also are beginning to understand a little bit more about what's happening with these in situ diseases such as DCIS, where the T cells actually seem to be more activated than they are in invasive cancer. So we've been mapping the immune changes that occur earlier on. If we preclinically treat at these earlier stages like hyperplasia, we can actually delay tumour onset, which we're pretty stoked about. And we're now trying to sort of use high-risk clinical samples to determine why is the immune system activated. And again, it's about pulling in mentors, right? I don't have the best expertise in immunology, but I admit that. And so I'm going to the experts that we have here and sort of bringing them in with me. And again, sort of bringing in my village. Lastly, we've been developing models to try and allow us to then test the therapies that we're developing. And this includes, groundbreaking new in vitro assays, trying to look at metabolism in normal cells, mapping the pre-neoplastic changes in our mouse models rather than just looking at tumour growth curves, and then trying to develop the models that we need that aren't already there for us. I think the other thing that I've learned to do, even though it hasn't felt natural for me, is to network. Okay, so Professor Jack Cusick is like a god in my field. He's done all of the prevention trials in tamoxifen, okay, which is the only therapy that we have for prevention. So I invited him as a speaker to a mammographic density conference that I was running. And then I made him work hard and I said, can you come and give Peter Mack's first public lecture on prevention? And so he came and did that as well. He also knew Kelly Phillips, who I'd already started working with. And then together we were actually put together a really poignant paper on the key steps that we would need for prevention. And so, again, it's through these connections that I was then able to pull him in to help me sort of get some messages across. And I just keep pulling in the people, right? So, like, I just keep asking for help. I'm not good at this. I need people to kind of help me. And so, the people that you see up here are amazing. And most of my grants get read by these people, right? And then, but the other thing I'd like to do is to sort of offer that same help back to them. So, I make sure that I'm giving back to these people at Peter Mac as well. And, a big shout out to Rob, right? We're in lockdown. He lives in Brunswick. I got my associate professorship and, my family didn't really understand what that meant. He's like on the doorstep with a bottle of champagne and pizza. Like, it's that kind of mentorship that's like pretty awesome. So I've just got a couple more slides. Unfortunately, there was a bit more passion that came to my prevention research in 2019. I'm one of 3 girls. And my sister Renee here in 2019 was diagnosed with bilateral breast cancer and a DCIS. And then my other sister and I were actually tested, and we found out that we had the BRCA2 gene in our family. So my other sister had preventative double mastectomy. I was lucky enough not to have the BRCA2 gene, but feel really horrible, I guess, because I'm not sharing any of the pain that they had to go through. They're big life decisions. And Heather Thorne would really kill me because it's probably not accurate, but I've tried to draw a little map, right? We didn't know. Mum had breast cancer. It was ER positive. We actually came to the familial clinic here, and they said, no, your breast cancer risk isn't that big. And so when my sister got diagnosed, me going back to Alison Trainer going, what? You told me we were fine. But, you know, it comes in different shapes and sizes. And actually it came from my grandfather who had aggressive prostate cancer, who we now know from Gail Risbridger, one of my previous mentors, is actually associated with BRCA2 as well. So I think I'm ever more passionate about breast cancer research. I've also learned a lot about time management. So in 2019, we welcomed Oscar, and his name's not David, so I mean, sorry, mate. But it was also at a time of COVID, right? So this was me in the NBCF RAC meeting, flying to Sydney for the day. It's not really me, it's from Working Mums. But so you're supposed to network in the lunchtime, and I was just like, I'm going to burst. I have to be in there doing it. But it was mentioned earlier today, we need to really think about making it a lot easier for women. The other times that I was doing it was actually in the bathrooms here, just with a really quiet pump. I don't know if you tuned in for the 2020 Peter Mac seminar series, but there was a couple where, you know, Oscar was just like running all over my head, and I'm like, we've got an international speaker. I've just got to keep going. But, you know, he's alive. He's cool. He's 3. Is there a right time for having children in your career? I don't think there is, but I think we can make it work, and I think you shouldn't let it stop you. You can have both. Mum efficiency is a real thing. I try to be totally in at work. I try to be totally in at home, and I do suffer both mum guilt every time I leave childcare and he's screaming, and also work guilt, you know, every time I'm coming in late because I'm dropping him off and he's crying and I have to read another book. Just comes with the territory. So just to finish, I was asked by Laurie to also sort of give a bit of an example of how I've stepped into leadership roles. I didn't wait for them to be given to me, I guess is the thing. I just kind of put my nose in and said, okay, I'm going to come into this. And I tried to do things that I was really passionate about. So I sat on just as a committee member on a tailored prevention and screening, put my hand up for it and they let me sit. I learned a lot about being on that steering group. And then I went along to some other meetings when they were working out for the VCCC strategic plan now, who would be running all of the programs, and just to listen and sort of get my nose in. But I was really passionate about accelerating novel therapies because of the research that I've just told you a little bit about. And so I put my hand up for it, and I've been selected as the co-chair of one of those programs, and it's been absolutely amazing. So and it's because of the things that we're trying to do. We're trying to reduce the barriers to obtaining drugs, preclinically and clinically. We're trying to increase the awareness for researchers about how to translate their work. We're trying to develop novel trial designs and tell our young clinical trials how to do that. And then also making clinicians and patients more aware of what trials are ongoing. So really important stuff, and I'm like absolutely stoked to be part of it. So, a woman in science. I try not to let the inequalities get me down. We've spoken about them today, but I try to just keep going forward because we've got a job to do and we can do it. And even though it's now common for, I think, both parents to work, I think 9 out of 10 of my friends would say that the cisgendered woman still does most of the work at home. I'm getting better at managing my frustration at my partner. I ask for help more. I'm embracing mess unless somebody's coming over. And I think the Gender Equity Committee has actually made a real impact, especially in the last 5 years. So you guys, what you've done is just amazing for everybody that's coming through now. And so like every day, I just want you to go. Women are super strong. I think our emotional intelligence is a huge benefit for running a project or running a lab. And I think rather than trying to be like our male counterparts, we should embrace who we are as females and just go for it. Thanks.
No, you can't sit down. We've definitely got time for a question. And while people are thinking about a question, I'm just going to comment that that pedigree that you had up there of your own family history was bang on. As a genetic counsellor, well done.
Well done. I went to Google Images and I'm like, I think I've got it right.
No, we can help you with that though if you'd like
yeah.
to come back.
And I even had in red who wouldn't go get testing, but no time.
Do we have any questions for our final amazing speaker for the day? Do we have any on Menti? No. Laurie, do you have a question? I think it's a very cruel irony after working at the Institute for Cancer Research in London that with the lab head who discovered the BRCA2 gene, that it all comes back to your family. It really creates such an enriched tale. Thank you for sharing details of your personal life with us today, because I think that it is really enlightening to see how other people do it, because it is a slog and persistence pays off, obviously.
Thank you.
Any questions? Really not? Okay, good.
So we're wrapping up. This is the end.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for everyone that's joined us today. This is actually your bit.
Oh, sorry, I failed. Laurie colour-coded our text today, and I have almost failed at every turn to remember that I am red. I have one job.
It's been a long morning.
Oh, yeah. I was also at a women's event last night that involved some wine, and so I'm like, I think that might be contributing to my I am red, Laurie, your red text. Once again, we would absolutely like to congratulate our 2023 Leo medalists, Dr. Annette Lim and Dr. Katie Fennell. You guys are absolute champions, and we're so privileged to have you in our mix. We hope that this award results in some amazing opportunities for you like it has done for the previous Leo medalists. And we're very lucky to have you here at Peter Mac. So thank you.
And I'd like to extend a sincere thanks to all of our speakers for joining us today. I think we've had all of our invited speakers that were really amazing, inspiring, and really impactful on so many different levels. And I know personally I've taken a lot from them. I'm sure everyone in this room has. So thanks so much for sharing everything that you did today. I also want to give a special shout out to everyone in the Peter Mac comms teams who have been instrumental in the background, just putting this on and dealing with all of the tech issues that exploded on us today. And I also want to give a special shout out to our gender equity and diversity admin crew, Anna and Danielle, who just, make it a lot easier for us to, get on and do these events. So with that, wishing everyone a really great long weekend. And yeah, thanks for coming. Take care.